Chapter 1117 The strongest organization. As the flames flickered, Derek and company subconsciously looked at the long dark red table. The first thing they noticed was the figure closest to them. The figure wore a simple linen robe, and had a head of long silver hair and indiscernible facial features. It made Colin, Lovia, and Derek find the figure oddly familiar. In an instant, they felt as though a bolt of lightning struck their minds, illuminating their blurry memories. Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. Read more chapters at allnovelful.com. Just as the pupils of the team from the City of Silver dilated, the figure turned around and looked at them. A pair of indifferent eyes immediately occupied their vision as extraordinary mysterious rings appeared. In a daze, Derek saw a figure in front of him. He was a handsome, radiant, and energetic man. He wore a pure white robe and had short golden hair. With his appearance, the surroundings became abnormally bright. The warm feeling was like a ray of light, instantly filling every spot. Derek felt as though he had seen the day, as mentioned in legends, momentarily forgetting where he was or what he was doing. The man took a step forward and his blurry figure overlapped with Derek. Then, Derek sat beside the dark red long table, occupying one of the high-backed chairs. He had become the handsome and radiant man who was attending a secret gathering. At the same time, the grizzled City of Silver chief, Colin, whose face was covered in old scars, encountered the same blurry and illusory figure. The figure was 7 to 8 meters tall. He was wearing silver full-body armor, and his eyes were glowing like the light of dawn. He raised the long sword in his hand, letting it press against Colin Iliad's forehead like a scepter. Demon hunter Colin struggled for a moment, but he quickly calmed down when he was enveloped by the orange light. With that, he and the giant in front of him merged into one. He strode towards the dark red table and sat on the second seat on the right. Shepherd Lovia encountered a man in a long black robe. He had black curly hair over his shoulders and a pair of eyes that seemed to be covered in shadows. It was difficult to see his face clearly, but the silver threads, complicated patterns, and gorgeous accessories were directly reflected in her mind. Lovia trembled and couldn't help but lower her head, allowing the layers of black wings on the man's back to wrap around her. She became the man and walked to the end of the dark red table. There were 2 high-backed chairs with complex patterns placed there. Lovia chose the left one. The remaining members of the City of Silver's expedition team also encountered similar situations, but the figures they faced were different. After they found their seats on both sides of the dark red table, the area around the empty high-backed chair at the seat of honor became darker, outlining a female figure that seemed to be shrouded in fog. Right on the heels of that, a voice that seemed to transmigrate from ancient times echoed in the ears of the attendees. We are trying to redeem ourselves and also maintain the balance of this world. Dissociation and deviation are undoubtedly the most basic order. This is also in line with his thoughts. I can't deny that we all have our own sinister thoughts and desires, but this is very normal. Death and spilling blood are inevitable. In the name of Rose redemption. Above the gray fog, Klein listened attentively. He couldn't wait to hear more of the contents said by the voice. However, whether it was the scene or the voice, it began to loop. It was as if it had only been fixed at a section lasting less than a minute. This is the scene of the establishment of the Rose redemption? Previously, the Red Angel Evil Spirit said that this was an extremely secretive organization established by a group of corrupted angels. Now, it seems like that isn't the case. The person who said that was probably not Medici, but either Sauron and Einhorn. They actually didn't know much about Rose redemption. Klein mumbled inwardly as he cast his gaze back at the City of Silver team that were repeating the actions like puppets, approaching the table, sitting down, listening and leaving. When the torches around the hall lit up one after another, Klein had already found something unusual with his true vision. He saw the murals on the wall come alive and rapidly expand, overlapping with the hall. It made the table, chairs, and floor tiles that had been cold for thousands of years warm up once again. It made the figures that had once been in this secret meeting cross the borders of time, reviving at their fixed seats, allowing the words from the past to reappear. Many of those figures were familiar to Klein. One of them was the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. This king of angels, who was still a member of the Rose Redemption, was the most lifelike among all the illusory figures. Combined with how the scenes were looping, Klein began to suspect the person who left the murals was Tail Devourer Ouroboros. In the previous temple ruins, there were murals left behind by him. Likewise for the ruins of the Battle of the Gods. In the Giant King's court, There are similar murals and signs of those powers. I wouldn't believe it if anyone were to say it's not him. Just how much does this king of angels like murals? He draws them wherever he goes. Klein couldn't help but lampoon Ouroboros in his mind. The second figure he noticed was sitting beside the angel of fate Ouroboros. He was dressed in black armor that seemed to be splashed with blood. He had red hair that resembled fire, looking young and handsome. The reason why he paid attention to this figure was because he had seen it in his dreams. In addition, it was also the most arrogant person among all the figures. Not only did it sit back in its chair, but it also placed its feet on the dark red long table. It didn't mind that the surrounding people were high-level figures of the same status. Red Angel, Medici. These are the kings of angels who participated in the secret gathering? Who else is involved? As Klein's thoughts raced, he decided to first rescue the people from the City of Silver who couldn't exit the looping cycles of fate. He had a lot of experience in this aspect. Yes, the medium to the loop is the hall itself. However, there's no need to attempt to destroy it. As long as it can temporarily break the cycle of fate, the dusk outside will seep in and dispel any abnormalities. They belong to the divine kingdom itself. In terms of status, they can only be stronger or on par with the power left behind by Ouroboros. After observing for a few seconds, Klein quickly came to a conclusion. After flipping a gold coin for a divination, he immediately spread his spirituality towards the crimson star representing the sun. Derek Berg's spirit body immediately tore through the cycle of fate, creating an invisible crack. The orange glow from the light of dusk outside the palace immediately surged into the hall from the window up high. Without waiting for Little Sun to figure out his situation, for fear that the true creator would lock onto him, Klein didn't hesitate to let him return to the real world. Derek snapped out of his daze and realized that he had unknowingly sat down at the side of the dark red table. He looked up blankly and saw the chief, Elder Lovia, Hyam, Antiona, and the others. He realized that there were still certain traces of confusion on their faces. Thinking back to his experience just now, Derek was alert as he deliberated and said, "The cycle of fate. Indeed." Colin Iliad, who had experienced this before, nodded slightly and stood up. He looked around, and his gaze landed on the largest mural that he had seen lately. The mural depicted the same exact hall. There were similar columns, torches, the dark red table, complicated high-back chairs, and object layout. As for those high-back chairs, there were 11 figures sitting in them. At the very end were 2 seats, and along the table, 5 on the left and 4 on the right. The City of Silver team's eyes also followed the chiefs and took in the corresponding scene. The 5 figures on the left were the beautiful silver-haired man, the red-haired and arrogantly seated man, an elder wearing a hood that exposed only his mouth, winkles, and beard, a dignified middle-aged man dressed in black armor, and a handsome man dressed in white robes. The 4 on the right were a black-robed mummy wrapped in bandages, a middle-aged man with facial features resembling the natives of the southern continent, a giant covered in silver armor, and a supple, beautiful, and dignified lady. The 2 high-back chairs at the very end were a man with dark black curly hair, and a woman shrouded in fog. At that moment, a guardian raised his right hand and pointed at the handsome white-robed man. His figure is made up of mysterious symbols. These symbols represent white angel, Aucuses. Before the guardian could finish his sentence, he suddenly let out a tragic cry as golden flames spewed out from his body. He instantly became a charred corpse, as if it would be reduced to ashes the moment it was touched. It made Demon Hunter Colin and Shepherd Lovia incapable of saving him in time. Don't try to distinguish those symbols. They contain immense power, Colin hurriedly warned the others. And above the grey fog, Klein was thinking of another matter. White Angel Aucuses. That's the Eternal Blazing Sun's true name? If not for the fact that the Giant King's Court itself isolates itself from projected powers, just using Jotun to read this name will attract his attention and incur divine punishment. Amidst his thoughts, Demon Hunter Colin stabbed his swords in front of him, creating an invisible barrier. Then, this City of Silver chief identified the symbols and labels that formed those figures. He began reading it slowly and firmly from the left. Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. War Angel, Medici. Wisdom Angel, Heribergen. At this point, the invisible barrier that was constantly shaking suddenly stopped. This was because this name was no stranger to the people of the City of Silver. This was the true name of the Dragon of Wisdom. Could it be that the Dragon of Wisdom later became the Wisdom Angel next to the Lord? Similar questions arose in everyone's hearts, but Klein discovered something strange. The history of the City of Silver had records of the name Haraburgen. The language they used on a daily basis was Jotun, a language that could mobilize the surrounding forces of nature. This also meant that, in the past 2,000 to 3,000 years, someone in the City of Silver had definitely read or written the name Haraburgen before, but there was no response from the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The Church of Knowledge and Wisdom still wasn't able to find the forsaken land of the gods. At this moment, Colin Iliad controlled his emotions and continued reading, Wind Angel, Leodoro. White Angel. Aucuses. Dark Angel. Sasrar. Evernight Goddess. Ammonizes. God of Combat. Badheil. Earth Mother. Omabella _ God of the Dead. Salinger. God of Spiritual Creatures, Tolsna. Although Klein had expected this, he was still somewhat stunned. The former Rose Redemption was frighteningly powerful. Amongst the 7 deities today, 6 of them were members. There was also Death, the god of spiritual creatures, and 3 kings of angels. This made him recall what the Red Angel Evil Spirit had once said. Rose Redemption has a close relationship with the birth of the true creator. It's impossible for you to imagine that certain people were once members of Rose Redemption, but they've since left it. Chapter 11:18 Klein's fear in the past. Rose Redemption could be called the Deity Alliance. But such an organization could only develop itself quietly under the might of the ancient sun god. It had to hide, and secretly scheme in the Palace of Dusk. How powerful was the ancient sun god in the past? Klein couldn't help but let out a breath as he felt deeply poignant. He examined his own tarot club and realized that, compared to the Rose Redemption, it was like child's play. Even if he counted the auxiliary members, Willow Septon, Pallas Zoroast, Azek Eggers, and Rionette Tynker, there was no way to compare with the Rose Redemption at its peak. No, even if I compare it with the current watered-down version of Rose Redemption, there's still a huge gap between it and the Tarot Club. After all, its leader and convener is only a sequence 4 saint. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he turned his attention to the 11 figures. Based on their images, titles, and true names, I can confirm that the Wind Angel, Wisdom Angel, and White Angel are the current Lord of Storms, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, and the Eternal Blazing Sunday. They really betrayed the ancient sun god, the City of Silver's creator, and they even feasted on the deity they served. The God of Combat and Earth Mother are indeed survivors of the Giant King's court. One of them is the eldest son of the Giant King, and the other is his queen. They're mother and son, so that way, the fact that Fainapotter didn't directly declare war on the Lord of Storms to help Faysac makes things a little odd. It requires some thought. Also, the goddess was indeed a former subsidiary god of the annihilation demonic wolf, the goddess of misfortune, Ammonizes. After that ancient god perished, not only did she grasp the authority of the Evernight and successfully ascend to the throne of Sequence 0, she also single-handedly destroyed all the descendants of Phlegria, sealed the Antigonus family's angel within the nation of the Evernight, and used the Mother of the Sky's body as her vessel for a descent. That's ruthless. Read more chapters at Allnovelful. Calm as a blessed of Evernight, Klein subconsciously raised his head to look around when he thought of this, afraid that his inner thoughts would leak out to the outside world. After entering the foggy town and learning that Antigonus and the Mother of the Sky were the descendants of the ancient god, Phlegria, Klein had a certain idea as to the true identity of the Evernight goddess. After all, in the history of the City of Silver, it clearly stated that the annihilation demonic wolf controlled the authority of the Evernight and had many strange powers. Combined with the Antigonus family's possession of the seer pathway, and the Mother of the Sky of the Nation of the Night clearly belonging to Evernight, Klein suspected that the annihilation demonic wolf Phlegria was an ancient god that had mixed 2 non-neighboring pathways beyond her characteristics. Therefore, he was extremely crazy and almost irrational. His goal was to destroy and corrupt everything. Hence, he guessed that the Evernight goddess might have something to do with the ancient god, Phlegria. From Grozel's travels, he learned that one of the 2 subsidiary gods of the demonic wolf king had gone missing after he perished, while the other had submitted to the phoenix ancestor. Furthermore, that true name corresponded to death of the 4th epoch, Mr. Azek's father. With that, he could vaguely connect the goddess of misfortune Ammonizes to the Evernight goddess. However, due to his temporary status as a blessed of Evernight, he didn't dare think too much about it. Instead, he focused his attention elsewhere. At this moment, when he saw her real name, he wasn't too shocked. Instead, He felt relieved and felt as though he were on firm ground. In addition, he was even more fearful of the Evernight goddess. Because she didn't want the ancient god, Phlegria, to be revived, the goddess controlled the various matters of the seer pathway, preventing beyonders who aren't cleared by her to advance further? That's right, that ecclesiastic in Afternoon Town mentioned who tempted Dark Angel Sasrer, the left hand of God, and the deputy of the divine kingdom, but he couldn't say the name, as if it had been erased. Isn't this a demonstration of concealment powers? Other than a place like the giant king's court, there's no way to say the names Evernight Goddess and Ammonizes together. Even if one did, no one would be able to hear it. There are two people who convened Rose Redemption. One is Dark Angel Sasrer, and the other is the goddess. Apart from the venue where the ploy was conceived, it's filled with the forces of concealment. In other words, the goddess had single-handedly directed the fall of the ancient sun god, started the cataclysm, and ended the third epoch. Compared to her, be it Adam or Ammon, they are still far from her. How could such a true deity be so easily trapped by Adam's arrangements and be unable to interfere with matters of the real world? Although it's not a conspiracy where something the goddess yearns for the most is used, making her willingly walk into a trap, how can the goddess, who wields the powers of concealment and plotted the death of the City of Silver creator, be unprepared? Also, what does "this is also in line with his thoughts" mean? Who does he refer to? After understanding so much hidden history, will I digest the scholar of your potion on the spot once I drink it? With this in mind, Klein raised his right hand and rubbed his temples, forcing himself to focus his thoughts elsewhere. When that ecclesiastic phantom mentioned the fourth king of angels, it self-destructed. Was it because the remaining three became true gods? However, the residents of the City of Silver would occasionally use the names Badheil and Haraburgen, so why wasn't there an anomaly? What is the difference? The strongest among the kings of angels, the left hand of God, Sasrer. Why did he disappear into the rivers of history? Perhaps he is one of the present-day evil gods, the true creator, the dark side of the universe, or the mother tree of desire. There are remnants of the godhood of degeneracy outside the hall. Was this left behind by him? Yes, the birth of the true creator is related to the Rose Redemption. How will he react when he sees the murals in this hall? With a thought, Klein cast his gaze at Shepherd Elder Lovia. The lady looked a little lost. She didn't seem to understand the titles and names, but she recognized a portion of them. For example, Angel of Fate Ouroboros. She had become a believer of the true creator in the temple ruins left behind by Ouroboros. Derek also stole a glance at Elder Lovia, but he didn't notice any obvious changes in her emotions. As the son of the Tarot Club, Derek was one of the people present who knew the situation of the outside world the most. Furthermore, he had long known who the kings of angels were. He suspected that three of them had later become deities. At this moment, he was the least confused and perplexed. He was only slightly shocked at Rose Redemption's level. This was more exaggerated than he had imagined. It's no wonder the Lord perished. Derek was first enlightened before he felt his heart turn heavy. At this moment, he swept his gaze and saw the chief's face turn pale and ugly. He even muttered a few words softly. "This is impossible, impossible." As far as I can remember, the chief has never lost his composure like this. Did he think of the Lord perishing due to Rose Redemption? He can't accept that he will never return? However, he had long learned of this from me. Just as Derek was feeling puzzled, he discovered that, aside from his tightly pursed lips, the chief's expression had returned to normal. In the minds of the other members of the exploration team, the prophecy they had previously learned in Afternoon Town appeared. "Omnipotent Lord, I repent," tempted Sasrer. The kings often came to the palace belonging to the Dusk to conspire. It was already too late by the time I discovered all of this. Degeneration, bloodshed, darkness, rot, murders, corruption, and shadows had already drowned this piece of land. A huge calamity will begin here. Hyam, who was holding the unshadowed crucifix, took a long while to calm his emotions. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "This is the place belonging to the Dusk. These are the subsidiary gods and kings of angels during the second epoch. They plotted everything, causing a huge calamity to happen. They made the Lord forsake this land?" Colin Iliad pulled out the two swords in front of him and half turned around, calmly replying, "Most likely. If we can figure out what exactly happened back then, Do we have a chance to please the Lord and let him look at this land again? Upon hearing the chief's answer, Aunt Iona asked anxiously. At that moment, Derek seemed to see a trace of pity and sadness in the chief's eyes. He heard him acknowledge and say, "Perhaps. Then let's continue exploring." The other team members pleaded with burning eyes. This was the closest the City of Silver had gotten to having a glimmer of hope over the past 2,000 to 3,000 years. None of them wished to let it go, even if they had to sacrifice their lives for it. Colin Iliad slowly surveyed the area and said, "Don't forget the principles to uphold during explorations. Don't act rashly at any time. Having confirmed that this place is related to redemption, we can always come a second time, a third time, or even more. There's no need to be so impatient." Upon hearing his words, the other members of the exploration team calmed down. They replied one after another, "Yes, Your Excellency." Under the arrangements of Demon Hunter Colin, the remaining members split up into small groups and carefully searched the hall. They didn't discover anything else that was valuable beyond the murals. Read more chapters at allnovelful.com. Of course, it wasn't that there was no such thing. This was, after all, a divine kingdom of an ancient god. What seemed like an ordinary long table, chairs, stone pillars, and torches might have special effects when taken outside. Furthermore, those effects could last for a very long period of time. Alas, it wasn't convenient for the City of Silver's expedition team to bring them around, as they lacked practical value. As for the other murals, they were profiled from different angles of the main murals. When combined, they formed a three-dimensional scene. After completing the search, Derek and company gathered again and followed the chief to the exit at the back of the hall. There was a gray-blue door with a single pane. With a 10-meter-tall door between the two of them, Colin Iliad carefully observed for a while before finally saying, "There's a powerful guard outside." Chapter 11:19 Tacit Cooperation. Upon hearing the chief's words, Shepherd Lovia immediately raised her question. "Just like the two silver knights at the front gate of the king's court, it won't take the initiative to attack targets outside a certain range?" Colin Iliad nodded slightly and said, "At least that's how it seems to be at the moment." They were already near the exit, but the guard outside had no reaction. This meant that the other party didn't possess real intelligence or spirituality. It was very likely that they were objects that came to life. Without waiting for the other members to speak, Demon Hunter Colin continued, "Huge, heavy." After obtaining the corresponding information, the City of Silver's group formed a tacit understanding. A team opened up a distance from the exit, but they faced towards the door. It was protected by Shepherd Elder Lovia. As the bait to attract the guards, a team took the corresponding holy oil from the chief and smeared it across the ground at the exit. Hyam, who held the unshadowed crucifix, and Demon Hunter Colin stood by the side of the door and used the stone columns to hide. Then, Colin Iliad sheathed one of his swords onto his back and took out a small metal bottle, gulping down the liquid inside. His aura rapidly faded away and wasn't obvious anymore. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to discover his existence. This was another setup. Hyam was in the open, while the demon hunter was hidden. After another 10 seconds, Shepherd Lovia stretched out her right hand and grabbed at thin air. Her silver-gray hair was dyed a deep blue color. The wind howled as the grayish-blue door opened. Right on the heels of that, heavy footsteps could be heard, causing the entire hall to shake. A giant, covered in iron-colored armor, rushed into the hall with a halberd in hand. Its exposed parts didn't show any flesh or blood, as though they were made of metal. Behind the black mask was a dark red glow. If it didn't move and stood there, it wouldn't be any different from a statue. Tap, tap, tap. The shaking in the hall became more and more obvious. The giant statue suddenly threw out the halberd in its hand, stirring up a hurricane that tore towards Derek and company at the door. Boom! The halberd struck an invisible barrier as the illusory ripples rapidly spread out. In front of Shepherd Lovia, an illusory figure that wore silver armor had appeared at some point in time. It stabbed its great sword into the crack on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. The giant statue didn't stop as it ran into the hall. At that moment, a whistling sound was heard under its feet as its massive body jerked backward. It had stepped on the spot that was smeared with holy oil. As the giant statue fell, the crimson light in its eye suddenly bloomed as an invisible force appeared and held it up. Suddenly, a blinding white light shot out from the unshadowed crucifix, accurately hitting the giant statue's only eye. The dark red color dimmed. Demon Hunter Colin leaped up and held the same sword with both hands, plunging it down like an eagle swooping down at its prey. Dawn appeared as they converged on the straight sword, making it exceptionally huge. It even exceeded Colin Iliad's height. With a poof, the bright sword pierced through the gap in the giant statue's armor, stabbing into its eye. A flood of light from the dawn rushed in. With his hands still gripping the hilt of his sword, Colin Iliad exerted more force. As the giant statue fell to the ground, he pulled out his sword and leaped to the side. The giant statue lay at the door as its body emitted cracking sounds until it finally all movement. Without looking at it again, Colin turned to look outside the door. After a few seconds he said, "There are no other gods for now. We can handle this statue." Derek and company quickly surrounded the giant statue and skillfully searched for materials. Above the gray fog, Klein watched the entire battle from the sidelines and was deeply impressed by the City of Silver's teamwork. According to his observation, it was unknown what metal the giant statue was made of. Its surface was covered with armor that had shocking defensive strength. It could completely ignore most attacks in battle, and it was very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, this giant statue didn't have any spirit. In other words, it was immune to the beyonder powers of the corresponding domain, such as spirit body threads control, hypnotism, frenzy, and nightmare. It was like a walking fortress that made one suspect that it was the work of the goddess of harvest. Klein believed that, if he were in their shoes, with the core powers of a bizarro sorcerer being useless, he could only rely on his two marionettes' powers to deal with the giant statue. He had no idea how the battle would develop. The distortion and disorder powers of an Earl of the Fallen might be effective, but I might not be able to finish it as fast as the City of Silver's expedition team. A team of Beyonders with a tacit understanding would be able to produce the effect of 1 + 1 greater than 2. Yes, that chief's confidence in timing, as well as his decisiveness in his attack, was also key. Klein nodded slightly, feeling a sense of admiration. If this were really a live stream, then he might not be able to help but send a gift as a tip. Of course, there was a high chance that it was just a thought. After taking away the most valuable item on the giant statue, the City of Silver's expedition team proceeded forward. They followed the corridor outside and entered another hall. Just like that, they weaved through the layers of palaces, towers, and different corridors, in an attempt to find more clues, as well as the entrance to the sea as described by the outsider Jack. Regardless of whether they believed the boy's words, they couldn't help but look forward to the dark blue sea behind the giant king's court. On the other side of the sea, there were kingdoms where humans flourished. There were no monsters hidden in the darkness. The sun rose and set, and lightning only appeared when it rained. People had all sorts of food there. During this process, the City of Silver's expedition team didn't encounter many enemies. Most of them were statues that had come to life. A small number of them were evil spirits formed by the combination of remnant emotions and the power of dusk. The latter was unable to put up any resistance against the unshadowed crucifix. "That's normal." The fool Klein above the gray fog nodded slightly, expressing his acceptance of the current situation. After the giant king perished, this place already belonged to the ancient sun god. It's unlikely that there will be a large number of giant powerhouses and mystical items left behind. When the kings of angels were conspiring, they definitely eliminated any unnecessary troubles ahead of time. Once the ancient sun god was eaten up, the ownership of this place was a mystery. Perhaps it was abandoned. In short, there aren't many foreseeable demigods or items. Well, without the unshadowed crucifix, those evil spirits will be very troublesome. The City of Silver's expedition team might not be able to advance so smoothly, making it impossible for them to advance so far unless an angel leads a team or activates a Grade 0 sealed artifact. When the unshadowed crucifix returned to Derek, the City of Silver's expedition team was already very close to the tallest building in the giant king's court. The dusk here was extremely dense, as though it came from that palace. "Once we leave this hole, we should come to the wing of the giant king's residence." Demon Hunter Colin got his bearings and direction before pointing ahead. Shepherd Elder Lovia nodded. Finally, there was some irresistible hope in her expression. Derek's heart beat faster, and he could no longer control his excitement. Then, he was placated by Antiona. After composing themselves, the people from the City of Silver entered the hall in front of them and saw that there were oil paintings hanging on both sides. These oil paintings depicted different giants. Some held bone flutes, some carried wind chimes, while others carried a 7-string guitar that matched their height. As the City of Silver's expedition team arrived, the giants in the oil painting suddenly came to life. They began playing their instruments, producing a beautiful tune. The light of dusk in the hall lit up a little. More and more food appeared on the long tables around them as they glowed with a tempting glisten, effusing a very tempting fragrance. Roasted chicken. Roasted goose. Fish with honey based. Is this a dinner banquet for the giant king's court? But aren't the sizes of those chickens, geese, goats, and fish too large? The work of the goddess of harvest? With a glance, Klein confirmed that the food that appeared was an illusion. After all, the giant king's court no longer had any ingredients, nor did it possess anyone who could envision or create them. This is normal food? Hyam, who was holding Thunder God's roar, stared straight at one of the long tables. His Adam's apple bobbed. Maybe. Derek sniffed and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Apart from the black-faced grass, they had never seen normal food. The meat that the monsters roasted was of different colors, but they also tasted equally as bad. It could even poison them. Demon Hunter Colin stared for a few seconds before sighing. They're all fake. Don't come into contact with them, or there might be unnecessary accidents. Other than Lovia, the team from the City of Silver retracted their gaze with great difficulty. They followed the chief all the way to the exit of the hall. After a series of inspections, Colin Iliad inserted his swords into the ground and pushed open the heavy door. A crack appeared as rich orange light shone inside. As the gap grew bigger, the towering palace gradually became clear. Then, the people from the City of Silver heard a crashing sound. At this moment, Colin drew out a sword and suppressed the restlessness in his team members' hearts. He then drew out his other sword and slowly walked out of the hall. Derek and the others followed cautiously. After completely bathing in the light of dusk, they looked to the left at the same time. There were railings formed from stone pillars. Beyond the railings, there was an orange-red cloud that was gently ebbing at the distance. On the endless swath of dark blue, they emitted crashing sounds. There was no need for anyone to explain. At the same time, the members of the City of Silver's exploration team recalled the records in the book and Jack's description. A term flashed in their minds. The sea. Previous index. Next add bookmarks. Input title/author. Home My Bookshelf Cookies app. Chapter 11:20 Court Chaser. The dark blue, boundless sea that ebbed gently and seemed to contain infinite life was presented to members of the City of Silver's expedition team. It was no longer a record written down in ancient books, nor was it a combination of words spoken by outsiders. Although it was still very far away, it seemed like contact was possible. The wine-red-haired Aunt Iona watched in a daze. She opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something, but in the end, all she said was the words, "the sea." Just as she finished speaking, a silver crack suddenly appeared on her forehead. The crack shot up rapidly, instantly splitting Aunt Iona into two halves. Warm and bright red blood gushed out, splashing across Derek's face. Without a sound, more silvery white light shot out from her body, splitting her body into countless small pieces of flesh. The reveling face full of hope was like a puzzle that had fallen to the ground, splattering everywhere. It was only at this moment that Demon Hunter Colin reacted. He brandished his two swords and slashed them diagonally outwards, as though he was dealing with invisible enemies. Clang, clang, clang. Silver light flashed, and the sound of metal reverberating echoed. The morning sun around Colin Iliad shattered and scattered in chaos. At this moment, the silver phantom behind Shepherd Lovia had already taken a step forward and stabbed the blurry giant's sword into the ground. Clang, clang, clang. As they surrounded the people of the City of Silver, the streaks of silver light appeared in different spots, trying their best to cut through the invisible barrier around them like insects struggling in amber. Clang, clang, clang. The dense, sometimes thick silver light constantly appeared, causing the defensive powers of the expedition team to tremble, as though it would shatter at any moment. However, be it Demon Hunter Colin, Shepherd Lovia, or Derek, they couldn't find any traces of the enemy. The fool above the grey fog was just about to give a certain reminder when the chief of the 6-member council seemed to realize something and crossed his two swords in front of him. Clang! The gigantic silver beam struck the two swords, causing Demon Hunter Colin's feet to sink into a solid stone slab. He took this opportunity and roared, "Unshadowed domain!" Upon hearing the chief's reminder, Derek didn't hesitate and stabbed his finger on the thorns of the unshadowed crucifix, doing so without any regard for the pain. As his blood oozed out, clear, bright, pure, and blazing light suddenly exploded, enveloping the entire area between the two buildings. There wasn't a single shadow in this area that could hide. Nothing else could be hidden. Light had become the ruler of this region. A huge figure quickly outlined itself on the side of the giant king's palace. It was wearing silver full-body armor and was nearly 5 meters tall. The flickering light behind the mask was either deep red or orange. And unmistakably, there was a single vertical eye there. This was a giant who was still alive. He didn't wait for the enemy to enter a certain range before attempting to attack, implying that he had sufficient intelligence. Unlike the other silver-armored knights, the giant's bracer had bright patterns on it. On the right was a blood-red color that circled around his arm, and at the same spot on the left, it was adorned with black spots. The giant knight raised his broadsword and pointed at everyone in the City of Silver. He said in a thunderous voice, "How dare you barge into the king's court and disturb Lord Sasrar's slumber?" Sasrar? Dark Angel Sasrar? The fool Klein above the gray fog was alarmed when he heard that. He subconsciously sat up straight. The former left hand of God, the deputy of the divine kingdom, the leader of the kings of angels, one of the 2 leaders of Rose Redemption, hadn't disappeared into the river of history. He was sleeping deep in the giant king's court, sleeping in the residence of the giant king? Why did he choose to enter a state of slumber? Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he subconsciously cast his gaze towards the palace that the giant knight was guarding. It was the tallest and most magnificent building in the giant king's court. The dusk's light seemed to transform into something corporeal that covered its surface, dyeing it with a clear sense of decline. It gave off the feeling that the sun had set and an eternal eventide was coming. On both sides were steeples, while on the other side were spires. The front door was a double door that opened outwards, with gray and blue as the main colors. Its height exceeded 10 meters, and it was covered with symbols, labels, and patterns. It looked stately and mysterious. There was a pitch-black socket on the left side of the door at a height of 3 to 4 meters tall. It was equivalent to an adult's fist. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly thought of the dream divination he had done in the past. Back then, he had seen the same scene, and the medium he had used for the divination was the giant's key he had obtained from Vice Admiral Iceberg. Is that the key to opening the giant king's residence? As he extended his hand, he tried to use his true vision to pass through the obstruction of the building to see the situation inside the palace. Unfortunately, he failed. The iron-black key, which was the size of a 7-string guitar, landed in front of him. At this moment, Demon Hunter Collins suddenly said before the giant knight attacked, "You're a court chaser?" The giant knight's broadsword didn't cleave down. Instead, he paused for a second and said in a low voice, "After all this time, to think that there's someone who can still remember court chasers. I'm the leader of all the chasers, the light color Murskogen, and I later followed Lord Sasrar. I once hunted powerful dragons, elves, devils, demonic wolves, phoenixes. Today, you are honored to die under my blade." This light color didn't soften his attitude. He hunched his body slightly and held his sword with both hands. Like a flying meteor, he rushed towards the people from the City of Silver with heavy footsteps at high speeds. Due to the existence of the unshadowed domain, he could no longer hide his body like before. Just as Colin Iliad, Lovia and company determined that Murskogen's attack would arrive in a second, this giant knight suddenly stopped his silver broadsword midway. Demon Hunter Colin, who wasn't in Lovia's evil spirit's defensive circle, suddenly had a premonition of danger. Without any hesitation, he lunged to the side. Boom! A silver ray of light suddenly emerged from the spot where he had been standing, destroying everything from within. This attack was so strange, like it was generated by the void itself. At the same time, there was also a change in Colin Iliad, who had ducked to the ground. His clothes were torn into pieces and cloth by his rapidly expanding muscles. In just a blink of an eye, this demon hunter had turned into a grayish-blue giant with bluish-black lines warped around him. At his forehead was a deep black crack. Every inch of him contained immense power, infinite mystery, and a strange psyche influence. If a Beyonder under Sequence 4 saw this scene, they would definitely suffer from a strong backlash. Their brains might suffer an excruciating pain that would cause them to lose their minds. Even their spirituality would be corrupted. And if they couldn't withstand such an influence, going crazy, losing control, or even sudden death were certain outcomes. This was the incomplete mythical creature form of a demigod. Originally, Colin Iliad didn't dare to release this form due to the influence of the twilight in the giant king's court. But now, he realized that in the unshadowed domain, the feeling of decline had weakened significantly. He then raised the two swords that had enlarged in size as well. With them covered in the light of dawn, he fought fiercely with the light color Murskogen in the domain that was enveloped in light and shadows. Clang, clang, clang. The three swords of the giants clashed and separated from time to time. Although Colin Iliad was at a disadvantage, he still managed to withstand the barrage of attacks from the king's court chasers' leader. From time to time, he would feel a strong sense of danger. Then, without any warning, he would either duck or roll in another direction. And at this moment, silver beams of light would always appear from the inside and outside. Derek had already closed his eyes. Ignoring the loss of blood, he tried his best to maintain the unshadowed domain. Hyam and another Dawn Paladin similarly didn't dare open their eyes. They helped shepherd Elder Lovia and slowly moved the group towards the palace without exiting the protective domain. If not for the help of the silver-armored knight Evil Spirit, they would have long been diced into small pieces of flesh and blood by the storm of light that swept the area. That light color Murskogen alone had placed the City of Silver's expedition team into a precarious position, with no chance of counterattacking. As expected of the leader of the king's court chasers, this should be the strongest force beneath subsidiary gods, or in other words, angels. Compared to the demon hunter, the Silver Knight has several more terrifying beyonder powers. Above the grey fog, the fool Klein held the sea god's scepter and carefully observed the battle. He quickly figured out the aspect in which light color Murskogen was powerful in. Firstly, his defensive power can be transformed into a full-body silver armor set. Secondly, it can be used to hide and conceal himself with the light, hiding any malicious intent. Thirdly, the condensed Sword of Dawn isn't something that can be maintained for a short period of time. It can be used as a normal weapon, sufficiently sharp, and good at cleansing. Fourth, it can create some sort of thin silver-white sword. It has the ability to teleport, and it can bypass most barriers to attack the target directly, and even cause it to erupt from within the target's body. Furthermore, this thin silver-white sword condensed without any warning, making it difficult to predict. This is a saint who's extremely good at fighting head-on. If it wasn't for the rich experience and strong intuition of the City of Silver's chief, he would have been in danger due to the suppression effect from being of the same pathway when fighting in his mythical creature form. If it were me, I might have already been killed. Of course, I wouldn't fight head-on with the leader of the king's court chasers. From the current situation, because the evil spirit needs to protect its shepherd, there's no way for it to directly participate in the battle. The City of Silver's expedition team has almost no chance of winning. Yes, they're already slowly retreating. Very rational. If it really doesn't work, perhaps Mr. Fool will have to deliver lightning punishment. However, the true creator should still be watching. My lightning storm might not be able to quickly resolve Murskogen. Klein's thoughts raced when he suddenly thought of a problem. How did light color Murskogen, who wasn't an angel, survive since the end of the second epoch? He's neither a demoness, vampire, nor undying. And from him possessing reason, as well as the ability he displays in battle, he doesn't have beyonder characteristics of other pathways mixed in him. Chapter 11:21 Weakness. Since light color Murskogen didn't gain his long lifespan from his beyonder characteristic, Klein could only begin considering external factors. The effects of a mystical item? No, he doesn't have any mystical items on him. Aside from the giant king's residence, there's nothing in the vicinity either. However, that's the sleeping ground of Dark Angel Sasra. Furthermore, the key is with me. I don't think Murskogen would dare or have the means to enter. Who took the key to the giant king's residence after Sasra fell into a slumber? Isn't that a bit too wicked? Of course, the palace without the powers of a deity augmenting it wouldn't be able to trap a king of angels. Or perhaps, this key had long been transported to the northern continent during the migration of the giants. Sasra chose to sleep in the palace because, other than a small number of existences, no one can open the door and affect his sleep? Was Vice Admiral Iceberg's key given to me through a roundabout manner by the god of knowledge and wisdom? He wants to learn of Sasra's present state? If it's not the effects of a mystical item, what could it be? Time given by an angel from the Marauder pathway? Ignoring the possibility of giving stolen illusory items to someone else, there needs to be an angel or a Grade 0 sealed artifact from the Marauder pathway. And there aren't any similar existences nearby. Back then, Merskogen was given a lifespan of thousands of years at once? Perhaps only Amon is capable of doing that. Clearly, he wouldn't help Dark Angel Sasra. In addition, this blasphemer's true body seems to be wandering around the forsaken land of the gods. If there were angels or Grade 0 sealed artifacts of the Marauder pathway here, they might have become his food long ago. The cycle of fate? After light color Merskogen's natural death, everything begins with him guarding Sasra again? Yes, that's possible. If the current Merskogen is in an aged state, then it's completely understandable how so much time has passed. Furthermore, because the time in this loop seals centuries, it hasn't reached a node yet. It's only normal that I didn't manage to discover any signs above the gray fog in my haste. With this in mind, he quickly observed his surroundings to find traces of the Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. However, there was no remnant power like that. Klein quickly retracted his gaze and continued to observe light-color Merskogen's intense battle with Colin Iliad and the silver-armored knight Evil Spirit. His spirit body threads are normal, eliminating the possibility of him already becoming a marionette. Under true vision, his condition isn't abnormal. This means that he isn't a figure summoned from history. The divine kingdom of the Giant King's court is slowing down the passing of time or aging. The former can be eliminated because my spirituality is almost unable to support my level of observation. This matches the amount of time the City of Silver's exploration team has spent in this area. There is a certain chance of the latter, with life progressing in the sunset state but being solidified during dusk. But the problem is that the ancient god, the Giant King, has already perished. Badheil, who wields the power of dawn and the power of dusk, has brought the divine kingdom to the astral world. It's impossible for this king's court to still have such a powerful influence remaining within it. Klein went through all the possibilities of extending one's life that he could think of, but none of them matched the situation of the leader of the court chasers. He had no choice but to consider another possibility. A secret art with a huge defect? This should be dependent on some kind of power in the Giant King's court. Otherwise, the range of Merskogen's activities wouldn't be so tiny. It wouldn't take until the City of Silver's expedition team arrived at Carrot Residence before he took action. The entity related to life inside the Giant King's court clearly exists, the former goddess of harvest, the present Earth Mother, Giant Queen Omabella. As this thought flashed through his mind, he cast his gaze at the giant statues outside the palace. They were no different from the ones the City of Silver expedition team had encountered along the way. They were only slightly larger. However, after careful inspection, he noticed a small number of abnormalities. These giant statues had the aura of life, and they possessed a certain amount of spirituality. However, behind the mask, it was pitch black without any dark red glow. This light color Merskogen had used some sort of secret technique in the life domain to bind his spirit with the living statues. Using them, he obtained a long life, but this results in him being limited to such a tiny region and being unable to leave. This is very similar to the way evil spirits exist. This way, Merskogen might not be able to show his normal mythical creature form. Klein conjured a gold coin and flipped it up to make confirmation. When he received an affirmation, he raised the sea god's scepter high and prepared to remind Little Sun through the prayer light. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin, who had avoided Merskogen's first attack, suddenly ducked and circled around him, running straight for the Giant King's residence from the side. His gaze was locked onto those gigantic statues. In the intense battle just now, although this City of Silver chief had always been at a disadvantage, he didn't give up on observing his surroundings, nor did he stop thinking. He was similarly puzzled as to why the leader of the court chasers could live for thousands of years. When he discovered that the living giant statues were only standing outside the palace without participating in the battle, he had arrived at a certain conclusion. He didn't know what exactly was going on, what principles underlay it, or what domain it belonged to, but his rich experience in exploration, and the intuition as a demon hunter, made him believe that the statues were the crux of the problem. Tap, tap, tap. With two swords in his hands, Colin Iliad dashed forward, taking large strides. However, he didn't run in a straight line as he zigzagged his way forward. Upon seeing this scene, light color Merskogen let out an angry roar as he held the broadsword in his hands and rapidly slashed forward. His reaction proved that Colin Iliad's judgment was correct. Bang, bang, bang. Demon Hunter Colin suddenly leaped away and did a roll. And above his original trajectory, Silver light appeared out of thin air and exploded, forming a long snake. It completely lifted the solid ground of the king's court, tearing open a deep chasm. With a loud thud, light-color Murskogen took a step forward. His nearly 5-meter-tall body bent and smashed the silver broadsword in his hand onto the ground. Clang! The area shook violently as the pillars snapped and fell into the orange cloud beneath. The ground between the two buildings exploded layer by layer, sending countless gravel flying. As for Demon Hunter Colin, he had already leaped up ahead of time and was in midair. He crossed his swords, creating an invisible barrier that blocked the rubble that resembled an arrow. At this moment, Murskogen, who had his back bent his knee and exerted strength into it. His massive body shot out like a meteor, instantly closing the distance between him and Demon Hunter Colin. During this process, the silver broadsword in his hands moved upwards. Seeing that Demon Hunter Colin was no longer able to dodge, a bright light suddenly shot over, accurately hitting Murskogen's broadsword. With a loud clang, Colin Iliad tumbled to the ground and finally approached the giant statues in one swift move. At the same time, he saw from the corner of his eye that the silver-armored knight phantom in front of Elder Lovia had long drawn out its giant sword. It had condensed the light of dawn into a huge bow as it shot out arrows consecutively. Light-color Murskogen's single eye had already been dyed with a layer of red. He didn't care about the arrows of light, and he allowed them to hit his body as they produced clanking sounds. He kept charging forward and brandished his broadsword, causing silver light to appear from different parts of the void. He chased after the giant-like Demon Hunter Colin, preventing him from attacking those giant statues. Suddenly, an arrow that was gathered from the lustrous brilliances tore past Murskogen and silently hit the gap in his visor. This was from the evil spirit that Shepherd Lovia grazed. Demon Hunter Colin was merely bait. It was the real attacker. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. One arrow after another flew past, but this time, they were all blocked by Murskogen. But at that moment, the demon hunter had already positioned himself well. He aimed at the remaining giant statues and swung his two straight swords that were enveloped by the light of dawn. Light bloomed as a hurricane of light blanketed the area. With continuous cracking sounds, the statues collapsed to the ground. Meanwhile, the aura of the light-color Murskogen rapidly declined. This King's Court chaser leader immediately roared, "Let's die together!" The silver broadsword in his hand exploded, splintering into countless fragments of light. They formed a terrifying storm that swept everything around them. The silver-armored knight Evil Spirit and Demon Hunter Colin simultaneously stabbed their swords into the ground, creating an invisible barrier. The dazzling white light swept between the two buildings, destroying the grayish-blue door and stone pillars behind Derek and company. However, when they swept into the giant king's residence, they failed to affect it completely. After an unknown period of time, just as Derek thought that the invisible barrier was about to be torn apart by the hurricane of light, the rays of light finally dimmed. In the ruins, the silver armor on the body of light-color Murskogen slowly faded away, revealing his grayish-blue body that was wearing linen clothes. Not far away from him, Demon Hunter Colin's body was covered in blood. He was transforming from a giant back to his normal state, but his aura was relatively stable. It was just that he had weakened greatly. With a clang, Murskogen genuflected as his flesh rapidly aged, decomposed, and evaporated. Under the orange light, he seemed to see the lively King's Court once again. In the frozen dusk, giants came and went, playing the 7-string guitar or bone flute, wrestling, or enjoying the delicacies that they could eat at any time. The passing of their lives moved extremely slowly, and their king sat on a high throne, watching everything from above with a stately demeanor. After that incident, none of that existed, so he chose to follow Dark Angel Sasrar. A smile appeared on Murskogen's face as he opened his mouth and softly shouted, "King!" This court chaser bowed his head, his flesh and blood completely evaporated, leaving behind a huge white skeleton and silvery white light that had condensed together. Chapter 11:22 The Instructions of the Fool Above the Grey Fog. When Klein saw light-color Murskogen rapidly age and decompose into bones, he suddenly recalled Mobit, Ciatas, Frunzier, and Snowman when they left Grozel's travels. He didn't have the time to stop it back then, and it was no different this time. This was because the leader of the King's Court chasers had never chanted the honorific name of the Fool, so he was unable to pull him above the grey fog. However, compared to before with the sea god scepter in hand, He could now do more things by using the prayer light. He immediately accommodated the Black Emperor card and activated the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. He made the paper angel carry his own words and use the crimson star to enter the real world and land on the remnant spirit of light color Murskogen. This was one of the methods that wouldn't lower his loftiness as the fool. After all, the true creator was still watching the area. As Murskogen's consciousness was rapidly wiped out of existence, an angel with black wings suddenly appeared in front of him. The speed at which his spirit body collapsed slowed down as he heard a loud and majestic voice. What is the advancement ritual and supplementary ingredients of the Silver Night Potion? Is Sasra really sleeping in the palace of the Giant King? Murskogen replied blankly. The advancement ritual of the Silver Night comes from the blasphemy slate. It needs a complicated altar to be set up, placing the remains of the 6 powerful creatures one had hunted in the correct positions, and receive the blessings of a deity. The supplementary ingredients are... I can't be certain. In short, that door didn't open after Lord Sasra entered. Amidst the response, the spirit of Murskogen's spirit slowly but firmly dissipated. Finally, he could no longer hold on as he was reduced to points of light that merged into the still dusk of the Giant King's court. And this conversation happened within the soul domain, so no one else could hear it. Thankfully, I'm careful enough to not let Murskogen say the main ingredient of the Silver Night Potion. Anyway, the Beyonder characteristic can be used to replace whatever it is. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to hear the answer to the second question. The fool heaved a sigh of relief and praised himself inwardly. He then focused and seriously thought about what Murskogen had just said. A deity's blessing? Isn't this advancement ritual a little too difficult? It's only sequence 3. I have to consider the circumstances of his timeline. Murskogen is a powerhouse who survived from the second epoch. It was a habit to call an angel a subsidiary god, and include them in the ranks of a god. That also means that the blessings of an angel should be sufficient. Yes, I'll use divination to confirm this later. Of course, even if an angel's blessings are sufficient, I'm unable to do anything for the time being. It will depend if the Grade 0 sealed artifacts in the City of Silver have any living characteristics that can also be communicated with. The act of setting up that altar is actually a little complicated. Must the remains of the 6 powerful creatures that one has personally killed have to be at the demigod level? It's very difficult for demon hunters outside the forsaken land of the gods. How can there be so many demigod-level creatures to be killed? Most of them are protected by their corresponding organizations. From the looks of it, the Church of the God of Combat should have a new substitute method while maintaining the essence of the ritual. Is this the difference between the first and second blasphemy slate? However, for a young chief like the City of Silver, he must have killed more than 6 powerful monsters. That's easy. As he was currently certain that the second blasphemy slate had appeared after the ancient sun god's death, he was able to determine that light color Murskogen was referring to the first blasphemy slate. He quickly conjured a piece of parchment from his interpretation of the advancement ritual and supplementary ingredients. Then, a divination with a topaz spirit pendulum was performed, to which he received a revelation that there were no mistakes. Then, he threw this message to the crimson star representing the sun. This is a gift from Mr. Fool. After doing all of this, Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. He increasingly felt that the answer to the second question was worth ruminating. He didn't say if Sasra was truly asleep. He only said that the door hadn't opened after the Dark Angel entered. And the only thing that didn't open was the door. The God of Knowledge and Wisdom gave me the key, and Adam gave me the unshadowed crucifix. Was it done to open the door to confirm the Dark Angel's condition? As his thoughts raced, he suddenly felt lucky. Fortunately, the true creator wasn't too interested in this. If this entity had sent down his will just now and tried to influence Murskogen's dissipating spirit, he would have clashed with the fool's paper angel on the spot. That would be rather awkward. Only at that moment did Derek dare to open his eyes. His face was pale from having lost too much blood. In order to maintain the unshadowed domain, he had allowed the cross to absorb quite a bit of his blood. He looked around and placed the unshadowed crucifix in front of him as he sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. At that moment, Hyam put away Thunder God's roar and his weapon. He removed the leather bag on his back and found a set of clothes to throw to the chief. To the City of Silver's exploration team, as long as they weren't wearing clothes and armor that were mystical items, it was inevitable that their clothes would suffer damage during battle. Therefore, They definitely prepared a few additional sets ahead of time. To them, the purpose of clothing covering their bodies was secondary. The most important thing was to leave space to store materials, ointments, and charms. Colin Iliad looked around vigilantly, but he didn't find anything unusual. He quickly put on his clothes and found one of the small metal bottles that had fallen all over the ground during the battle. He removed the lid and gulped it down. His face turned a little green as if he had been poisoned. However, his wounds and the signs of decline were improving. As for Lovia, she was no longer able to maintain the grazing of the silver-armored knight, and she placed it back inside her body. By the time Merskogen's beyonder characteristic condensed into a silvery white luster that resembled a miniature sun or heart, it was put away by demon hunter Colin. This shepherd elder looked at the nearby palace with his grey eyes and said, "Chief, the path to the sea might very well be hidden there." Lovia paused for a moment before adding, "Perhaps there's another way to get to the other side of the sea." As Colin Iliad watched Derek, Hyam, and the others clean up the battlefield, pick up items, and deal with the mutilated corpse of Antiona, he shook his head and said, "The Dark Angel is sleeping inside, and he is definitely a king of angels, one we are currently unable to resist. Even facing him will be very difficult. Let's head back first and inform everyone that we have seen the sea before making preparations for entry into the Giant King's palace." Lovia's silver-gray hair fluttered slightly as she wore a solemn expression. "But we don't know anything. We can't make any targeted preparations." After saying that, she fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, "I have a suggestion. You, Derek, Hyam, and the others can head back first. I'll stay behind and attempt to enter the palace to gather useful information. I can fuse into the shadows and perhaps not disturb that Dark Angel. If I don't return, it means that the danger inside has exceeded the limits we can handle." When Lovia mentioned that she might die, her expression didn't change at all, as if she had long been prepared. Colin listened quietly and stared at her for a few seconds. "No, we can't bear such risks. If you awaken the Dark Angel, he might leave the Giant King's court and attack the City of Silver, but we definitely won't be able to resist against him." Without waiting for Lovia's reply, Colin Iliad turned his head and looked at the other 3 members. "Derek, what's your opinion?" "My opinion?" Derek was somewhat at a loss. He nearly blurted the question back out. Hyam and the other Dawn Paladin were equally shocked. This was because this was an internal conflict among the 6-member council. Colin Iliad had actually asked for Derek Berg's opinion. Could it be that the chief has been nurturing Derek as the next elder of the 6-member council? The 2 members of the expedition team looked thoughtfully at their teammates. "This is him asking for my opinion?" The fool Klein above the grey fog frowned slightly. His brain immediately began to churn rapidly. What views can I have? If they were to open the door and awaken Sasra, I wouldn't be able to save any of them. All I can do is get them to ask for the help of the true creator. Let's wait until I figure out the situation regarding the Dark Angel from the Red Angel Evil Spirit and other related existences before beginning the exploration. I don't have to worry about the Dragon of Wisdom and Adam's thoughts for now. No matter what, there's nothing wrong with choosing to be calm and cautious at such times. As his thoughts raced, Klein sternly said, "Return." He then projected this image into the crimson star representing the sun. Derek was stunned for 2 seconds before calmly answering the chief's question. "I think we should give up for now and wait until we're ready." Colin Iliad nodded and said to Shepherd Lovia, "This is my decision." Lovia fell silent for a moment before saying, "I will defer to your decision." She didn't say anything else as she helped Derek and company mark the area. As Antiona wasn't killed by a blood relative, there was a high possibility that an anomaly would happen. Therefore, the expedition team would mark the area, making the ones who arrived later to be more vigilant. However, they didn't need to worry about such effects since they were very far away from the City of Silver. While they busied themselves, Lovia suddenly looked up and said to Derek and Hyam, "This is the Giant King's court. There might not be any anomalies." She didn't explain as she looked at Antiona's pile of flesh that had been burned into ashes by the flames. She grabbed a handful of them and placed them inside her leather bag. After completing these matters, the City of Silver's expedition team found another passageway, but they obtained a disappointing outcome. Following that, under the lead of Chief Colin Iliad, they retraced their path back. After entering the palace that had already lost its main door while having the oil painting band playing their tunes, Derek couldn't help but turn his head to look outside at the broken railings again. He looked at the orange-red cloud in the distance, towards the deep blue sea. After staring at it for a few seconds, he retracted his gaze and realized that the chief's light blue eyes were also silently looking in that direction. Colin immediately turned his head and said calmly, "Let's go." Then, without turning back, he proceeded steadily. Chapter 11:23. After the expedition above the grey fog, when he saw that the City of Silver's exploration team had begun embarking on their way back as the giant king's palace remained unchanged, Klein heaved a sigh of relief and leaned back in his chair, exhausted. After 2 hours of observation, his spirituality was nearing its limits. At most, he could hold out for another 15 minutes. Regardless, the things obtained from this expedition completely exceeded my imagination. It's only right to give the Silver Night potion formula to the City of Silver. As he rubbed his forehead, his thoughts began to wander. Being aware of these ancient secrets is very helpful to my digestion after my advancement. The problem now is that my Bizarro Sorcerer potion hasn't been fully digested. From the feedback I've been getting over this period of time, it can be seen that all sorts of strange tales are indeed useful. When Miss Magician completes the script and publishes it, it just needs some time to build up some momentum before it's done. However, she started writing a few days ago. I don't know when she will finish her manuscript. Why can't she just write a few more hours every day? When I went to pick her up this time, I should urge her. With this in mind, Klein suddenly recalled something. He hadn't given Anderson a reward for finding Vice Admiral Ailment. I'll wait until he helps Danitz become a conspirer. Anyway, this was also part of the agreement. The advancement ritual of an iron-blooded knight isn't difficult, but it's not simple either. Especially for a hunter, it's even more troublesome. It requires a hunter who is adept at provocation and enjoys coming up with ploys to build a team of at least 30 people, and also nurture a deep sense of friendship amongst them while making them strong. When they act almost as one, they'll set up the ritual. The greater the strength and camaraderie amongst the team, the better the effects of the ritual. Seeing that the City of Silver's expedition team was returning in an orderly manner without encountering any accidents, he finally felt at ease. He left the world above the grey fog and threw himself into bed, falling into a dream. After some rest at the afternoon town camp, Derek Berg finally recovered and his face was no longer as pale. He had just eaten bread made from black-faced grass powder when a figure grew out from the shadows outside and said in a low voice, "Derek, the chief is looking for you." "Yes." Derek subconsciously stood up. "Thank you." He was originally prepared to find the chief and hand over the Silver Night potion formula. After watching the messenger retreat into the shadows, he walked out of the room and arrived at the clearing where the bonfire was illuminated. At a glance, Derek saw many members who hadn't participated in the expedition gathered in groups of 2 or 3. They were excitedly discussing something. They already knew that one could see the sea from the giant king's court. They knew that it wasn't too far from the coast, and as long as they found the correct path, they would arrive there in no time. This was an important step for the City of Silver to save themselves after discovering the outsider, Jack. The residents of the City of Silver, who mainly had the power of dawn, finally saw the light of dawn. Their long wait and persistence seemed to have paid off. Derek could understand the feelings of his team members because he was the same. However, from the world Gammon Sparrow, he knew very well that the waters in the ruins of the Battle of Gods weren't that simple. To head to the other side of the sea would probably be extremely difficult. Ignoring everything else, just Dark Angel Sasrer, who was sleeping in the giant king's palace and blocking the vital path outside, was a problem that he couldn't overcome at the moment. I can only hope that Mr. Fool will bless me. Yes, for that boy to appear in the temple ruins, it means that there are other paths that can bypass the giant king's palace and reach the sea. Derek thought optimistically as he circled around the quietly burning bonfire and walked towards the chief's room on the other side. Suddenly, he saw a person sitting silently in the shadow of a boulder. It was a man in his 20s, and he was much taller than Derek. He held a pale gold bracelet with 3 small bells hanging on it as he looked at it with his pupils unfocused. Derek was no stranger to this man. He knew that he was the husband of Antiona, Dolores, a Sequence 6 Dawn Paladin. In the City of Silver, before the age of 18, one could date freely until they were married. And if one didn't have a partner at the age of 18, they would be arranged to have one. It was the same for widows and widowers after 3 years. This was a necessary measure to ensure the necessary population level for the City of Silver's continuation. It seemed like it was against human rights, but for the continuation of the entire city in the Dark Lands, It could only be done this way. Furthermore, this could ensure that everyone had a certain number of close relatives, preventing the possibility of mutating into a terrifying evil spirit after their death. As for Dolores and Antiona, they were neighbors who lived on the same street. They had known each other since they were young and had a good impression of each other. In the end, they started dating when they were teammates of a patrol team. Over time, they became husband and wife and had a deep, loving relationship. In light of how they had a young child, Colin Iliad had deliberately left one of them behind during the expedition to the Giant King's court. On the one hand, Derek felt that there was nothing wrong with the chief's arrangement, and on the other hand, he felt a strong sense of sorrow because of the way Dolores acted. It was as if he had returned to the state when he had to personally stab his parents to death. From the beginning to the end of the expedition, it only took half a day's time. However, to Dolores, it meant everything had changed. After a moment of silence, Derek retracted his gaze and continued forward, subconsciously taking a few heavy steps. At the same time, he thought of a rumor. Shepherd Elder Lovia once had a husband, but he died in an expedition. This was very common to begin with and wasn't worth discussing. However, other than Lovia, the team that explored the ruins of the temple had all gone mad. After they were eradicated, there were rumors that gradually spread among the residents of the City of Silver. During that expedition, Elder Lovia had eaten her husband. In the night, with low lightning frequency, the winds were rather cold. Derek shivered and turned his attention back to the scene before him. He took a few steps and arrived at his destination. He raised his hand and knocked on the chief's door. "Come in," Colin Iliad said calmly. Derek pushed open the door and entered. He saw the chief wearing a linen shirt and dark-colored coat wiping his two swords with oil. Colin Iliad didn't stop. He raised his head and looked at Derek. "What are your thoughts on this expedition? What's the chief's motive for asking this?" Having been influenced by Alger, Derek subconsciously had this thought. Unable to grasp the true intentions of the chief, he had no choice but to close the door and answer frankly, "There might be other paths to the seaside. The palace of the Giant King should be very important, but that's too dangerous. We need more information." Colin Iliad nodded and asked, "The kings of angels and other existences who call themselves deities secretly plotted together because they wanted to resist the Lord? And their success caused this land to be forsaken?" Although Derek had never directly heard of such an inference, it wasn't difficult to come up with a similar conclusion based on the various secrets he had learned from the Tarot Club. Yes, that should be the case. Colin fell silent. Even his act of wiping his sword slowed down. After a few seconds, he put down the items in his hand and took 2 steps forward. "Those who participated in the conspiracy are still active on the other side of the sea?" After a moment of silence, Derek replied in deliberation, "Mostly. But not too much." Colin Iliad nodded, indicating that he had nothing else to ask. Derek hurriedly said, "Chief, I obtained the incomplete formula of the Silver Night Potion, including the supplementary ingredients and the advancement ritual during Light-Color Merskogen's death." When he said this, Derek knew that his lie sounded overly fake. It could be seen through right away because he didn't even dare to open his eyes back then. However, he just couldn't think of a better excuse. If Mr. Hanged Man were here, he would definitely have a better solution. Just as this thought came to his mind, he heard the chief speak slowly. "Very good. What is it?" Derek was stunned for a second before he hurriedly recounted the corresponding ritual and supplementary ingredients. Colin listened quietly and let out a long sigh. "You have contributed greatly this time. This is extremely important to the City of Silver. In the future, our limit will be Sequence 3 and not Sequence 4. Up to a certain range, the risk of the expedition teams will be greatly reduced." Why will the risk encountered by the expedition teams be reduced when the upper limit is Sequence 3 within a certain range? As Derek was happy that he had made such a contribution, he couldn't understand the chief's words. However, he knew that this was something he didn't have the right to understand. He planned on asking around at the tarot gathering later. He then bade farewell and opened the door. "Derek!" Colin Iliad suddenly called out to him. Derek turned his head in puzzlement and found that the chief's expression was rather solemn. Colin fell silent for a while before shaking his head. "Be careful of Lovia." "Yes, Your Excellency," Derek replied from the bottom of his heart. Backlund, North Borough. Hazel took a carriage back to the city from Moose Manor, and she was preparing to meet Miss Audrey at the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation to discuss matters regarding donations and help. After many interactions, she had a very good impression of this noble lady. She didn't feel pressured when beside her, and the strange emotions accumulated in her heart had mostly dissipated. She gradually recovered more of her forgotten memories. I should have a teacher. What exactly happened that day? Every time I think about it, I tremble all over. Hazel cast her gaze out the window, feeling a little depressed. Her carriage was driving past the vicinity of Buckland Street. At this moment, a person dressed in the clothes of a mailman rode his bicycle horizontally across the carriage, looking rather relaxed. Hazel casually sized him up and saw a monocle on his right eye. Chapter 11:24 Enhanced Teammates. Hazel's gaze instantly froze as she felt something rapidly expanding in her mind. It was about to tear apart an invisible barrier and spew out. She instinctively looked away and curled up slightly. Then she felt a ray of light shoot out from the depths of her heart, exploding into countless memory fragments in her mind as it howled, raging back and forth. She suddenly remembered what had happened at home that day. She recalled her father, mother, maid, and servants wearing monocles or pinching their eye sockets. The indescribable horror was so vivid, as though it had been carved into her bones. The expression on Hazel's face crumbled as she curled into a ball as she trembled. The maidservant in the carriage was stunned as she hurriedly stood up and reached out her hands in an attempt to help her up. "No!" Hazel trembled as she shouted with a nearly sharp voice. The maidservant was shocked and frightened. She stood rooted to the ground, not knowing how to react. After shouting, Hazel calmed down. She sat up and looked ahead in extreme fear. She saw the monocled postman enter another street, leaving only his back visible. I wasn't feeling well just now. I'm feeling much better now." Hazel turned her head and barely said to the maidservant. She realized that she wasn't as afraid as she remembered. It was as if she had already gotten used to the situation after some time. If not, I might have lost control just now. Why would I use the word lose control? Thankfully, I forgot those memories and didn't do anything eye-catching when I saw the postman. It took me 10 seconds to break down. If not, I might have been detected, and something terrifying might have happened. Her thoughts flashed uncontrollably as her body trembled slightly. "Miss, do you need to go to the clinic?" the maidservant asked hurriedly. Hazel instinctively shook her head as her mind turned chaotic as she casually said, "Let's go to the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation first. I remember there's a private clinic nearby." "All right." The maidservant turned around and instructed the coachman to speed up. Hazel kept taking deep breaths in an attempt to regulate her tense emotions, panic, and fear. It had to be said that it was somewhat effective. She seemed to have calmed down a little instead of breaking down immediately. At that moment, a sparrow had appeared above the carriage at some point in time. It squeezed its right eye and spat out a human language with almost no sound. "She seems to have some unnecessary misunderstanding about me. It looks like T had some interactions with her before. Ah, she's a resident of Buckland Street. Interesting." Before long, the carriage arrived at Phelps Street. Seeing that the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation wasn't far away, Hazel suddenly said, "To the cathedral. Turn towards St. Samuel Cathedral first. I want to pray." She wanted to tell the bishops what had happened that day and what she saw today. In the gap of the carriage, a black ant moved its feeler on its right and whispered in a human voice. "Humans nowadays are really lacking in creativity. They go to cathedrals at the first sight of problems. I thought I would discover something if I followed her. Next time, I'll steal the cathedral in front of them." As he spoke, the other feeler of the ant moved as well. Hazel immediately forgot what she had just said and what she had just recalled. She had forgotten that she had met a postman wearing a monocle. She got off the carriage at the entrance of the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation and headed in with her maidservant in tow. Clearly, her maidservant and her driver didn't remember the previous order. In the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, Audrey welcomed Hazel and brought her new friend into the activities needed to help the injured soldiers at the front lines. As the World Gehrman Sparrow had mentioned that the leader of the secret order, Zeratul, and other angels were hidden in Backland, Audrey carefully gave up on the third stage of treatment for Hazel. She hoped that Hazel wouldn't recall what she had experienced for the time being to prevent any accidents from happening. Her current plan was to busy herself with charity work, helping others to make Hazel gradually brighten up and strengthen her ability to withstand the psychological trauma. In the pirates' free city, Furs was drinking a high concentration of fruit wine that was locally produced, recording what she had heard and encountered today. Suddenly, her spiritual perception was triggered as she instinctively looked to the side. She immediately saw a figure appear in the void, quickly reforming. It was Gehrman Sparrow in a half-top hat, black trench coat, and a cold expression. With a swoosh, Furs stood up with her wine glass and fountain pen. She subconsciously said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Sparrow." As she spoke, she hurriedly placed the items on the table. Klein pressed his top hat and looked around. "Do you want to leave?" Furs' eyes darted to her sides before she said, "All right." Over the past few days, she had already made preliminary records of the traits of the city that were different from other places. Without saying a word, Klein gestured at the items on the desk with his chin, indicating for Miss Magician to quickly pack up. Furs didn't hesitate at all as she hurriedly organized her drafts, as though she had heard an instruction. As he stood there and watched the other party busy, he suddenly said, "How's the progress with the horror story?" Furs trembled indiscernibly before replying, Soon. Klein gently nodded his head. "How much longer?" "A week. No, 5 days." 5 days, tops, Furs quickly replied. Klein didn't say anything else. After Furs packed up her drafts, fountain pen, half a bottle of wine, and other memorabilia, he took 2 steps forward and grabbed her shoulder. Countless indescribable figures flashed past, and Furs felt a little more relaxed than before. She even attempted to record this travel. Before long, she returned to Backland and returned to the alley where she had disappeared from before. She heard the World Gehrman Sparrow say, "Rest for a few days before setting off. Take note of any replies. Also, ask your teacher again if there's any information related to the Blood Emperor tutor, mainly about the various ruins." "All right." Furs quickly agreed and thanked him. After separating from Gehrman Sparrow, she returned to a street in East Borough and entered an apartment that she shared with Zio. Zio put down the newspaper and looked at her friend. "Was it effective?" "Pretty good. I went to a free city belonging to the pirates this time." Before Furs could finish speaking, her expression changed slightly. "Give me my coffee beans and cigarettes." "Why? Was it lacking there?" Zio asked in puzzlement. Furs ran straight for the room inside and sat in front of the desk. She opened her drafts and picked up a pen. Without looking back, she said, "For the sake of the new book, remember to make me coffee." Zio followed her to the bedroom door. When she heard that, she opened her mouth but didn't say anything. In another spot in East Borough, in a rented apartment with a similar layout. As Zeratul had already arrived in Backland, it was unknown when Amon would be baited over. The Red Angel evil spirit's true motives were unknown, and he was planning on preventing George III from becoming a Black Emperor. On the one hand, Klein was trying his best to digest the Bizarro sorcerer potion, and on the other hand, he was making various preparations. At this moment, after handling the magician, he opened up a piece of paper and wrote, "Dear Mr. Azek, I've recently learned quite a bit of ancient history. I believe you will be very interested in it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have chosen to be a history teacher after losing your memories. This history involves some concealed secrets, so it's not convenient to describe them in a letter. When you wake up, I will share it with you in person. Also, I can create a charm called Yesterday Once More. Once used, you can find your past self through the historical void and borrow power from him. This is actually not something worth paying attention to. What's most important is that you can retrieve your memories from your past self. There's no need to use decades to slowly awaken them. I believe you will like it. I attached 2 with this letter. If you wake up, you can try their effects. I'm currently in an environment filled with undercurrents. If you come over, please be careful. Please observe the situation in advance. On the matter of George III advancing to a Black Emperor, I will try to do something, but the chances of success are very slim. Finally, I wish you well. I also wish that you wake up soon. Your eternal student, Klein Moretti. After folding the letter, Klein stuffed 2 Yesterday Once More charms into the envelope. Following that, he took out Azek's copper whistle and blew it. The huge skeleton messenger immediately emerged from the floor and received the letter with his head at a height lower than Klein. Klein nodded slightly and watched as the messenger disintegrated into bones before disappearing. After doing all of this, he used 2 fingers to pull out Will Septon's paper crane from his wallet. He wrote on it with a pencil, "I have something to ask you." He placed the paper crane under his pillow and lay down on it. With the help of cogitation, he entered a deep sleep. In the depths of the pitch-black sharp tower, Klein once again met Will Septon, who was sitting in a black baby pram. Without waiting for the other party to speak, he directly asked, "Do you know who can provide the method needed to accommodate the uniqueness? What kind of price would it take? If the price is too high, then forget it." Klein added inwardly. Will Septon, who was sucking on his thumb, was taken aback. "You want to help me accommodate the die of probability?" Klein nodded seriously and said, "Regardless of whether it's a success or not, we should try our best." Just as he finished speaking, Will Septon's tears rolled down his cheeks. The chubby baby pounded his hands to the side and cried sadly. He whimpered and said, "It's useless. It's too late. I've already rebooted, and I still have to spend at least 22 years growing before I can accommodate the uniqueness. Why didn't you say that earlier? I'm really unlucky. It must have been that silly snake Ouroboros, who took too much of my luck." Chapter 11:25 Opportunity. As he listened to Will Septon's tearful complaints, Klein was at a loss as to how to react. He could only remain expressionless. After the baby wrapped in silver silk calmed down, he asked in puzzlement, "Even if I said it earlier, it's useless. When I met you, you were already rebooted." "No, I was still Will Septon at that time. I didn't have Ceres as my last name. I'd rebooted for a long time back then." The chubby baby wiped his tears and said, "Although I'm still quite some time away from becoming an adult, as long as I'm willing to take a certain risk, it's not impossible to accommodate it. With the luck I've accumulated, that risk can be resolved. But the difference now is just too great. There's no way to make up for it." With a thought, Klein said after some deliberation, "Perhaps you can find an angel from the marauder pathway to steal time from you, allowing you to grow up faster." Will Septon was still choking as he shook his head and said, "It's useless. It's impossible for them to accurately steal my childhood and teenage years. If it's only a matter of time, it won't allow me to grow. It will only reduce the age I can originally live to. When the time comes, Will Septon Ceres will die prematurely, having been born June 1350 and dying October 1350, for a ripe old age of 4 months. But I've seen cases of aging rapidly due to the theft of time." Klein recalled what he had seen in Amon's mausoleum. The chubby baby still shook his head. "No, that's just a manifestation of it being symbolized. If it's used on me, it will just be a baby that starts to grow wrinkles while his hair turns white. To truly accurately steal the childhood and teenage years, it has to be Amon, and it has to be his true body in person." At this point, the baby wrapped in silver silk and Klein fell silent at the same time. No one spoke for a long time. If he were to get Amon, the years that were possibly robbed wouldn't be limited to just the childhood and teenage years. After a while, Klein took a deep breath without hiding anything. "Then there's no need to consider this for now. However, I still want to know where I can find a way to accommodate the uniqueness. If I have a chance to get it, I definitely can't miss it. Who knows when it might come in handy in the future." Will Septon put down his tear-stained palm and sniffed. "There's no need to ask others. I've already gotten it long ago, but I can't do it. Otherwise, do you think that me being president of the Life School of Thought was for nothing?" Klein was surprised and curious. "Why can't you do it?" Will Septon pulled the blanket in the baby's pram and said, "There are 3 ways to accommodate the uniqueness. One is to be born naturally with it, which is equivalent to being a uniqueness coming to life and imbuing human nature into it. The other is to make the uniqueness come to life to a certain extent before forcefully putting it into one's body. By relying on the power of the Creator to suppress it, it will slowly take quite some time to slowly wear it down before one gets used to it and achieve a balance. The third is to concoct the uniqueness into an incomplete potion and drink it with a simplified apotheosis ritual. There's no need to mention the first method. This is why those brothers are enviable. The second is impossible after the ancient sun god's death. The third is the only viable option at the moment, but for the sequence 1 of the fate pathway, it depends on the machinations of fate. The first point was mentioned in Emperor Roselle's diary. It was said by Mr. Dorr. Does the second point mean that, After the ancient sun god wielded so many authorities, he was at least half a level higher than the present true deities, or even one full level. The creator's level? As if in thought, Klein asked, "What do you mean by only depending on the machinations of fate? What has this got to do with me saying earlier that I can help you accommodate the uniqueness?" Willa Septon's chubby baby face revealed a look of poignancy. The apotheosis ritual for the fate pathway might be the simplest, or perhaps it's the most difficult. As long as we find the correct opportunity in the torrent of fate, we can directly consume the potion and attempt to advance. But the problem lies in the fact that the exact opportunity cannot be divined or predicted. There's no way to lock onto it. I can only eliminate certain interferences and patiently search as I experience life. I've already rebooted countless times and I've spent ages, but I still haven't encountered it. At this point, the baby's tears flowed down again. It sounds simple, but in fact, one can only rely on fate. It really depends on how well you look. With a sigh, Klein asked in enlightenment, "When I said that I would help you accommodate the uniqueness, did you vaguely grasp that opportunity?" The chubby baby cried even harder. "Although I didn't really find it, I did sense it to a certain extent." "Is that so?" "Back then, when Willa Septon came into contact with me, other than hoping to receive the help of yesterday once more, was it also pushed by luck?" "What a charlatan," Klein tersely acknowledged. "Then there's no other way. You can only give me a few more of those charms." Willa Septon nodded heavily. "All right," replied Klein generously. He then added, "You have to give me a few paper cranes." With that said, the baby wrapped in silver silk and Klein fell silent. In the rental apartment, after waking up from his dream, Klein got out of bed and walked to the room outside. He took out pen and paper and began to write to Leonard. "I obtained charms that originate from high-sequence beyonders of the seer pathway. It allows someone to borrow power from their former selves." Klein didn't mention that it might be something his dear poet needed, as if he was simply describing it. After folding the letter, he took out a gold coin and a rectangular diamond-like charm and blew into the adventurer's harmonica. Rionette Tinker, who was wearing a dark and complicated long dress, walked out of the void with 4 blonde reedied heads in hand. All eyes were cast towards the yesterday once more charm. The 4 heads spoke one after another. "Who to deal with this time, so direct?" Klein sighed and smiled. "It's unconfirmed yet. I'm going to attempt at foiling George Ill's plans. I might need your help at critical moments." The 4 heads in Rionette Tinker's hands spoke one after another. "This sounds extremely dangerous, requires higher payment, more of these charms?" The comber of Klein's forehead twitched as though he had experienced the pain of tearing his soul apart. 3. Rionette Tinker's head, who had failed to join in the final sentence, shook. Klein smiled and answered, "No problem, but it will take 1 to 2 weeks. Firstly, he had recently separated many worms of spirit and made quite a number of yesterday once more charms. It made him feel like he was nearing his limit and needed some rest. Secondly, he felt that it would be another 1 to 2 weeks before he could digest the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion and attempt to advance to Scholar of Your Once Miss Magician's new book was published. When the time came, he might have a simpler method. Rionette Tinker's 4 heads began to bob with the help of their hair, indicating that that wasn't a problem. Klein then pointed at the letter and gold coin. "Send it to the mailbox at 7 Pinster Street." He had previously divined that Leonard wasn't at home. Apparently, he had gone south of the bridge. One of the heads of Rionette Tinker tilted up as she sucked the letter, gold coin, and yesterday once more charms into her mouth. As he watched Miss Messenger enter the void and vanish from his room, Klein pondered for nearly a minute before beginning to set up a sacrificial and bestowment ritual. Since the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion was about to be completely digested, there was no doubt that he had to prepare the various ingredients for Scholar of Yore in advance. Among them, the demonic wolf of Fog's transformed heart and white frost crystal could be obtained from the Evernight goddess. And with the demonic wolf's transformed heart, he could go to the spirit world to bait a hound of Fulgrim. After a series of tasks, he finished setting up the altar and took 2 steps back to inspect the surroundings. It's still considered clean. In addition to the Wall of Spirituality's seal, it satisfies the requirements of a ritual. I haven't made any contribution recently, so how should I ask for a bestowment? Could it be that I'm telling the goddess that I plan to take a credit loan and pay it in installments? Will this be a little sacrilegious? I'll try to sacrifice something of value. If the goddess is willing to accept it, she will do the corresponding bestowment. Something of value. As he thought, his thoughts moved to the junk pile above the gray fog. He really wanted to pack up the items he couldn't sell for the time being, such as the biological poison bottle, the interrogator beyonder characteristic, lunatic beyonder characteristic, blatherer's aura, thousand-faced hunter's blood, six-winged gargoyle's eyeball, spirit world plunderer powder, and other items to sacrifice to the goddess to exchange for the materials needed for Scholar of Yore. However, he felt that this would make the goddess seem like a rag-and-bone man. Hence, he could only give up the idea. It has to be of roughly the same value. I can't use Grozel's travels. It hides quite a bit of secrets. Perhaps it will be of great use. Yes, the next time Little Sun and the others explore the giant king's court, I can give them Grozel's ashes. This time, I wasn't sure how far they could go in the expedition, and was worried that they were unable to return after entering the Grozel's travels. Sea God's Scepter? That's even more important. Not only is it my most powerful sealed artifact, but it also involves the believers of the Sea God. It will be my anchor for some time. When I have other things, more anchors, it can be given to Mr. Hanged Man. Vin Rambise's Beyonder characteristic. This has already been promised to Miss Justice. After some thought, he realized that he didn't have many choices left. One was Life's Cane, and the other was the Flaring Sun Charm, the Fate Siphon Charm. Yesterday once more charms and control spirit bullets. The latter are all disposable items. Even if they're combined, their actual value wouldn't be comparable to the main ingredient of a Sequence 3 potion. Besides, once my ability to transfer wounds improves, it can take over a portion of the Life's Cane's effects. After hesitating for a while, he finally made a decision. Chapter 1126, Unexpected One. After bringing the wood-colored cane back to the real world, Klein immediately began the ritual. He lit the candles and burned the corresponding essential oils and herbal powder, took 2 steps back, and skillfully recited the honorific name of the goddess. Finally, he said, I sacrifice this cane filled with life to you. I'm willing to receive your blessings. He didn't directly mention the demonic wolf of fog's transformed heart and white frost crystal. This was equivalent to making an equivalent exchange, not offering sacrificial items and praying for a bestowment. There was no need to be too meticulous in other aspects of the ritual, but this was a case of showing his attitude at a fundamental level. He felt that he needed to be careful. When Klein finished his sentence, 2 out of the 3 candle flames swelled and intertwined, forming an illusory and dark mysterious door. The door slowly opened, creating strong invisible winds. They swept up the Life's Cane, allowing it to disappear into the seemingly endless cosmos through the gap of the illusory door. Immediately following that, there was a flash as 2 items tore through the barrier and landed on the altar without making a single sound. One of them was a strange heart formed by wisps of white mist, and the other was crystalline frost that emitted cold air. Klein was delighted as he hurriedly lowered his head to thank the goddess for her bestowment. When he raised his head again, the dark and mysterious door had closed. It rapidly faded away, and the altar was completely restored to normal. Phew, it really succeeded. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and took 2 steps forward, putting away the demonic wolf of fog's transformed heart and white frost crystal. At this moment, the relaxed him couldn't help but have a thought that he absolutely couldn't say out loud. If I had known that it would go so smoothly, I wouldn't have had to use my Life's Cane. That huge junk pile might have been enough. Perhaps I didn't need to sacrifice anything, and the goddess would have bestowed them to me. The present situation indicates that she is personally supporting me becoming a Scholar of Yore. Of course, this way, if I receive too many bestowments, who knows what price I'll pay in the future. Using Life's Cane to trade for it makes me feel more at ease. Well, from the looks of it, before advancing to Sequence 2 and becoming an angel, the goddess will still shower her blessings on me. In the future, it will be hard to tell what kind of developments and changes will happen. With this in mind, he reined in his thoughts, ended the ritual, and tidied up the altar. Then, he began to plan on how to deal with the Hounds of Fulgrim, the so-called Sapphira Castle Keepers. A magician never performs unprepared. South of the bridge, Rose Street. Leonard changed into a black and white police uniform and wore a red glove. He led his team members and the real policemen to the only cathedral of the Church of Earth Mother in Backlund. The epaulets he was wearing corresponded to a high-ranking inspector. But in fact, with his status as a captain of a Red Gloves team, he should be equivalent to a superintendent or even a chief superintendent. However, officers at that rank wouldn't involve themselves in such missions. Wearing those epaulets to the Harvest Church would easily arouse the suspicion of the public. After passing through the door, Leonard scanned the area and realized that it was empty. There were only two figures. One was sitting in the front pew, focused on praying. The second was the handsome man dressed in a priest's robes. He had black hair and red eyes. Emlyn White. Leonard nodded secretly as he walked down the aisle to Bishop Utravsky. He then coughed twice, making the half-giant bishop open his eyes and look over. "I'm an inspector from the Backlund Police Department." Leonard showed his identification and said, "We would like to invite you back to assist in our investigations." Father Utravsky stood up slowly and asked in a calm tone despite looking down at him, "What's the matter?" "The nearby residents reported your abnormal behavior, saying that it's possible that you're a spy for Fasak or Fainapotter." Leonard explained the reason he had long come up with. At the same time, he was prepared to pull Bishop Utravsky into a dream at any moment. Once he resisted, he would try to control this blessed in the shortest time possible. With the Red Gloves team's distribution, as long as they didn't directly encounter a true demigod, even if they were to face a blessed who was in charge of a holy artifact, they would have a good chance of taking down their opponent. Furthermore, before Leonard set off, he had applied for a Grade 1 sealed artifact. This was also the reason why he had delayed taking action until today. Father Utravsky fell silent for 2 seconds before turning to look at Emlyn White, who was standing by the candlestand. Emlyn's slightly complicated expression froze. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Father Utravsky retracted his gaze and nodded slightly. "Okay. So cooperative? I thought we would experience an intense battle and that we had to be very careful not to cause any casualties." Leonard was taken aback before he smiled. "Thank you for your cooperation." If there really was a battle that ended up harming a blessed of Earth Mother, Leonard suspected that the tense situation would rapidly be aggravated. Through the ancient history in Grozel's travels and the various secrets he learned from the Tarot Club, and the corresponding explanations of Old Man Palez, Leonard knew that the relationship between the Church of Earth Mother and the Church of Evernight was like dried timber. It could be ignited with a tiny spark. When the time came, the history books would record today's events. The war would go from a localized problem to a fuse that ignited the globe. Leonard Mitchell had lit a religious gunpowder keg. Phew! Seeing that Father Utravsky didn't resist and accepted the protective custody, Emlyn White secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He was very satisfied with his performance at the Tarot Club. At this moment, the Red Gloves team member, Cindy, looked at Emlyn, who lacked a level of masculinity due to the gentleness of the soft moonlight. She lowered her voice and said, "Cap, sir, there's still a priest. Should we take him with us?" "Yes, we can temporarily shut down the Harvest Church for some time to prevent any accidents from happening." Emlyn, Leonard, after a few seconds and repeated deliberation, Leonard finally said, "If the spy case involves Fainapotter, he would also be considered a suspect. Let's invite him back to assist in our investigations." Emlyn was stunned, unsure of what expression to show in response. East Borough, in a 2-bedroom rental apartment. Furs rubbed her dark eye circles and drank the last mouthful of bitter coffee. She stood up abruptly and began changing her clothes. "Done writing." Zio, who was enjoying her breakfast, was taken aback. It had only been a day and a half. Furs shook her head and took a deep breath. "No, but I've already written the first volume. I can hand it over to the editor of the publisher. If it's serialized, there's no need to finish it all now." Zio thought and said, "This is indeed a good idea. It can effectively reduce your stress." Furz's expression twisted as she closed her eyes. "I hope so." In another rental apartment a few streets away, after a series of tasks, Klein, who had come up with a plan and made his preparations, put on creeping hunger and quickly turned transparent as he entered the spirit world. Looking up, he saw the 7 pure lights that comprised of 7 different colors. He released the arms of his 2 marionettes and took out a box. He removed the wall of spirituality around it, allowing the aura of the demonic wolf of Fog's transformed heart to emanate from it. Then, he pulled Anuni while Anuni pulled Kona's. Together, the 3 of them rapidly teleported deep into the spirit world. Along the way, all kinds of strange spirit world creatures passed by them like oil paintings that depicted hell. After an unknown period of time, Klein's premonition for danger suddenly stirred as a scene quickly appeared in his mind. Red, black, white, blue, and other colors saturated and overlapped as a slender figure suddenly appeared. It looked like a hound. Its entire body was covered in black short fur, and its eye sockets were two balls of dark red burning flames. The ends of its mouth extended to the back of its head. It clearly existed there in its corporal form, but it gave off an illusory feeling that felt surreal. Hound of Fulgrim. Klein immediately turned around and faced it. He released his two marionettes at the same time, allowing them to wander in different directions. In the blink of an eye, the Hound of Fulgrim appeared. The two dark red flames, which weren't too deformed but were absolutely terrifying, turned and looked at Klein. Right on the heels of that, its figure became more and more illusory. It instantly disappeared, as though it was a projection from history. It ran away just like that? As Klein muttered to himself in shock, he became even more wary of the possibility of a surprise attack. More than 10 seconds later, two figures phased into existence. They were covered in black fur, their eyes burning, and the corners of their lips extended to the back of their heads. However, there was only one dark red flame left in the eye sockets of each of the two monsters. The remaining fireballs were in their paws. Without waiting for Klein to react, the two Hounds of Fulgrim lay down in the void of the spirit world and wagged their tails. They wagged their tails. Klein's mouth was agape, wondering if he was dreaming. Chapter 11:27 Sapphira Castle. Only after the two burning dark red fireballs floated over from the Hounds of Fulgrim and landed in front of him did Klein snap back to his senses. He felt puzzled and relieved. Why did they harm themselves to come up with a pair of eyes for me? There seems to be thick and sticky blood surrounding them. If this is their trap, I would have already stepped into it. To think that I fell into a daze for a few seconds. This is a fatal mistake for a bizarro sorcerer in battle. However, no matter who it is, it's inevitable that they will have similar reactions when encountering something like this the first time. The terrifying enemy who they had meticulously planned to deal with had ended up kneeling down and wagging their tails the moment they see them. This is like a dream. This performance is very similar to Erode's. Could the great existence above the spirit world be able to showcase special traits in the spirit world? As this thought flashed through his mind, he looked at the two dogs that were prostrating themselves in the void and wagging their tails. He stretched out his left hand and grabbed the two dark red flames and large amounts of thick, dark red blood. The moment he came into contact with these things, he suddenly heard familiar ravings and roars. They were sometimes shrill, sometimes dull, sometimes maniacal, sometimes seductive, sometimes crazy, and sometimes ethereal. Immediately following that, an illusory grayish-white fog appeared in front of him. The fog spread out in all directions. Above them, there was a towering and majestic palace that looked like a god's residence. This was a very familiar scene, because every time he entered the mysterious space above the gray fog, he would pass through it. In the beginning, it was difficult for him to notice his surroundings after he took 4 steps counterclockwise. However, as he got used to it, and with the advancements of his sequence, he was able to easily take the opportunity to observe the phenomenon. And at that moment, Klein hadn't chanted the honorific name of celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, or taken 4 steps counterclockwise. This made him extremely wary. Then, he saw a few figures appear in the endless gray fog. They overlapped with the gray fog at times while separating at other times. They were none other than Hounds of Fulgrim with their eyes burning with dark red flames, and their bodies covered in short black fur. The 2 Hounds of Fulgrim that had lost one eye each returned to their companion's side and blended into the dark spots in the gray fog. The entire phenomenon vanished as well. In the depths of the spirit world, Klein realized that there were no longer any Hounds of Fulgrim around him. Only his 2 marionettes and strange spirit world creatures remained. Klein lowered his head and looked at the eyeballs and blood in his hand. With their presence, he confirmed that what he had just experienced was not an illusion. The Hounds of Fulgrim are also known as Sapphira Castle Keepers. They live in the historical void. I saw them active within the gray fog before fusing with the dark spots. Combining what he had seen and heard, Klein gradually came to a bold conclusion. Perhaps Sapphira Castle is referring to the mysterious space above the gray fog. It's referring to that strange door of light. As for the gray fog, it's a symbolic object formed from all the history in the spirit world. There are void gaps present in it. Every time I enter the mysterious space through the grey fog, I leave certain traces there, making the hounds of Fulgrim no longer feel unfamiliar with me. They see me as the owner of Sapphira Castle, so when they saw me, they immediately offered me what I needed and shook their tails to gain my favor. After a day of planning, asking about the situation, and inviting helpers, I ended up targeting my own guards? As he thought of this, he inexplicably felt a sense of absurdity at the situation. It felt like the fool above the grey fog was reaching out his hands to fleece someone, only to end up fleecing himself. Phew. Sapphira Castle. Although this development makes me even more afraid, in any case, I still have some understanding of the owner of the grey fog and that mysterious space. The unknown is the most terrifying thing. After standing silently in the depths of the spirit world for a moment, Klein slowly exhaled and summoned his 2 marionettes back. He planned on waiting for the Bizarro sorcerer potion to be completely digested before attempting to seek out relevant knowledge about Sapphira Castle from Rhodes and other places. When the time came, if anything were to happen, he could use his advancement to fight it. East Borough. In a 2-bedroom rental apartment. With her dark eye circles, Furs returned and retrieved the day's newspaper and letters in passing. How was it? Zio, who had just returned home for lunch, asked. Furs covered her mouth and yawned. Not bad. The editor I know is very satisfied with my new book's topic and writing style. He decided to arrange for its serialization as soon as possible. You might not be aware, but the horror stories of Backland hospitals have been very popular recently. A best-selling author had gained inspiration from it and is beginning to serialize similar stories. I'm actually not the first to do so. This is a good thing. Zio thought about it and nodded seriously. This meant that Furs, who had also written the horror stories of Backland hospitals, wouldn't attract too much attention. Her new pen name wouldn't be tested either. I know. Furs threw the newspaper aside and took out a few letters that were stuffed in it before quickly flipping through them. Soon, she found the reply letter from her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. Furs's expression immediately turned solemn as she quickly tore open the envelope. She spread open the letter and began reading. Benjamin Abraham is from Intis. He lived in Roselle's era. Apart from mysticism knowledge and a small amount of inheritance, he didn't leave anything of value behind. Later on, everything was destroyed by the Aurora Order. I'm unable to provide the corresponding information. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow is about to be disappointed. Furs pursed her lips and pulled off a magic trick, burning the letter in her hand to ashes. Then, she began writing a reply, asking her teacher if she knew of the secret ruins of Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. Klein went above the grey fog and listened to Miss Magician's prayers. The trail of clues for Benjamin Abraham have come to an end. It's all the fault of those lunatics from the Aurora Order. At the same time, he learned of the serialization of the horror stories of Backland's hospitals. After returning to the real world, and just as he was about to head out for a meal, he suddenly saw Miss Messenger walk out of the void with 4 heads in her hand. One of them had a letter in its mouth. Who sent it? Asked Klein in puzzlement. Rionette Tinker's remaining 3 heads replied, I. Seduced? Idiot, who is that? Klein grew confused as he took the letter and opened it. The mastermind behind those matters is George III. His goal is to become the Black Emperor. Are you interested in stopping this matter? Trissy. This demoness actually dares to write me a letter. Isn't she afraid of being caught by Miss Messenger on the spot? All right, Miss Messenger just said that the sender was a seduced idiot. Trissy seduced a man and got him to help her summon the messenger while she hid far away and waited for the other party to contact her through a mirror? She's pretty smart. She really is very persistent in investigating this matter. Isn't she afraid that she'll be killed by either me or George III? That man should be a beyonder. It would be quite difficult for an ordinary person to hold a summoning ritual. After all, it relies on one's spirit and spirituality. Klein was first puzzled before he came to a realization. Immediately following that, he began to wonder why Trissy managed to guess that George III wanted to become the Black Emperor. Without sufficient mysticism knowledge, and without knowing the Black Emperor's apotheosis ritual or the corresponding history, even a demigod would find it difficult to guess. It definitely wasn't as easy as the Red Angel evil spirit had said. Could it be that Trissy has other helpers? Or could it be that she has obtained more power from the primordial demoness, including all sorts of knowledge and secrets? Klein frowned slightly as he felt that there was something amiss. If there was a chance, he would definitely get rid of Demonis Trissy. After thinking for more than 10 seconds, he took out a piece of paper and pen from his pocket and scribbled a reply. I'm interested, but I don't know what you want to do. In the Backland Bridge area, a man in his 30s looked in horror as the headless woman. No, the four-headed Demonis reappeared before him and dropped a letter. Are all the messengers in the mysterious world so terrifying? Only about 5 minutes after Rionette Tinker left did the man catch his breath. He picked up the letter and opened it to take a look. During this process, his gaze gradually burned because it meant that he could meet that beautiful woman again. According to her instructions, he waited until the evening before he took out the black sticky lump. He separated them and applied them evenly onto a mirror. A few seconds later, the mirror turned dark, as if it was connected to another world. In the blink of an eye, the mirror presented a room that was completely different from the present environment. There was a young girl dressed in a dark black dress. She was none other than Demonis Trissy. The man who finished the ritual immediately revealed an infatuated expression as he subconsciously whispered. The reply said that he was interested. The light dimples on the sides of Trissy's cheeks slowly bloomed, making the mirror appear brighter. Her eyebrows relaxed as she said, I'll send you a letter. Forward it to Gehrman Sparrow. You absolutely cannot read its contents. After obtaining the man's unhesitant promise, Trissy stretched out her right hand and swiped it across the mirror, causing the dark aqueous light to disappear. She immediately found pen and paper and deliberated for a few seconds before quickly writing. The secret mausoleums needed for the Georgil's ritual should be from Blood Emperor Alista Tudor, and there is an existence who understands it very well. It might be able to help us successfully infiltrate and cause damage during the ritual. I have a way to contact that existence, but we have to wait until the next full moon. What you need to do is provide me with some blood, hair, flesh, or bones from a descendant of the Abraham family. Trissy. Chapter 1128 Finally an outcome East Borough. In a 2-bedroom rental apartment. After receiving the reply from Demonis Trissy from Miss Messenger Rionette Tinker, he pulled a chair to sit down and began reading. This means she knows of Mr. Door's existence, and she has a way to use the bloodline of the Abraham family to communicate with that entity. Trissy can already withstand Mr. Door's cry for help. Isn't she afraid of losing control because of this? Besides, she seems to be very sure of Mr. Door's identity. She really has obtained more knowledge and secrets from the primordial Demonis. But in such a situation, why would the Demonis of White Katerina be pursuing her? Questions arose in Katerina's mind as he read the short letter. As Trissy's vague mention of the matter was within his understanding, he believed that she wasn't lying in this aspect. Furthermore, she had provided a very feasible solution. Of course, the prerequisite for this method to succeed was to obtain the correct ritual and have a descendant of the Abraham family be willing to take a huge risk, as they use something related to their bloodline as a medium. Of these 3 points, he was missing the first point. He still had some doubts about the third point. He attempted to find a safer and more concealed method, but Demonis Trissy seemed to only lack the second point. To me, it's easy to find the descendants of the Abraham family. I can directly contact them through Miss Magician. However, once I hand over their hair, blood, flesh, and bones to Demonis Trissy, this will put them at risk of being hexed. Klein understood the Demonis pathway rather well and knew that they were very good at hexes. As his thoughts raced, he gradually came up with a countermeasure. It was to use the hair, flesh, or bones of the deceased. He remembered that Miss Magician had mentioned to the fool that she had once buried an old man named Lawrence. He was undoubtedly a descendant of the Abraham family. I hope it wasn't a cremation. Although this is somewhat sacrilegious to a corpse, speaking to Mr. Door is a necessary procedure to dispel the Abraham family's ancient curse. It's better to use the dead rather than implicate the living. When the time comes, I'll add this in Trissy's reply. I'll claim that this is a requirement stipulated by the descendant of the Abraham family for the ritual's medium. Also, I have to first confirm that Trissy is going to speak to Mr. Door, and not attempt to pull him back to the real world. They are either of a high level or are involved in high-level situations. It will be difficult to obtain any effective revelations using divination, but Emperor Roselle said that the ritual required to facilitate Mr. Door's return is very complicated. It definitely can't be set up by a small number of descendants. I can get Queen Mystic and Miss Sharon to monitor Backlund's underground market and see if there are any abnormal trades of materials and personnel. Klein nodded slightly and decided to find Miss Magician in a while. He could also rush her writing. Northborough, Phelps Street. On a bench, a young man in a black trench coat and silk top hat was sitting there with a thin face and a broad forehead. He looked at the withered and yellow Intis parasol trees in a daze. He wore a crystal-carved monocle on his right eye, looking rather refined. At that moment, an elder who was heading to St. Samuel Cathedral stopped in his tracks when he saw that something was amiss. He asked gently, "Young man, what are you worried about? You lost something in this war?" He suspected that the young man's relatives, lover, or friends had died in the air raid or during intense battles at the front lines. That was why he was sitting alone by the side of the street, looking lost. The young man raised his hand and pinched his monocle. He sighed and shook his head. "I'm just thinking about some rather complicated questions." "Are you a philosopher?" The old man was taken aback as he blurted out. "No, but I often bring up philosophical problems for others, just like who I am, where I am, and what's my future." The young man smiled calmly as he continued to ponder. From time to time, he would purse his lips and whisper silently. The elder couldn't understand him and could only shake his head. Under the gaze of the stray dogs, sparrows, ants and microbes in the air, he slowly left. The young man didn't turn his head. His monocle reflected yellow leaves that were floating down as he muttered to himself, "To parasite, to not parasite, to parasite, to not parasite. See the bait, devour the bait, see the bait, devour the bait." After getting the hair from Lawrence's remains from furs, and seeing the horror stories of Backland hospitals being serialized in the Tussock Times, Klein entered a patient state. He also promised to send Miss Magician to a new place next week to record new sights and customs. Soon, a new week had arrived. After having his lunch, he planned to take a short nap to prepare for the 3 o'clock tarot gathering. At this moment, Rionette Tynker, who was holding 4 blonde red-eyed heads, walked out from the depths of the void. One of them had a linen bag in its mouth. Who sent it? Klein suddenly had an inexplicable feeling. He had a complicated premonition as he didn't immediately reach out to receive the bag Miss Messenger was holding. Rionette Tynker's 3 free heads spoke one after another. The real, mutated, king of mushrooms, this string of words. I roughly understand what's going on. Klein controlled his expression of not baring his teeth as he slowly took the bag. When he opened the bag, he wasn't surprised to see copious amounts of demons. No mushrooms. Some of them were white and full, as though they would spurt out milk with a single poke. Some of them were black at the bottom and were embedded with thin blood-colored lines and markings. Some of them were covered in golden stars, and the mushroom cap was as large as a palm. At that moment, the mushrooms were still squirming slightly, as though they wanted to spread their hyphae and spores. After swallowing his saliva, he picked up a letter that was surrounded by mushrooms, and he started reading, "My dear friend Gehrman, I've finally completed your request. I've invented mushrooms that can be planted in dark and harsh environments. They can grow by devouring the flesh and blood of monsters, without any other conditions. Their descendants will be divided into 2 categories. The first type will accumulate various kinds of poisons that cannot be eaten. However, they can be used as a source of poison. The other type can be used for food after being cooked at high temperatures through boiling, stewing, and frying. You must remember not to eat it raw or before it's cooked. Otherwise, they will proliferate in your body, using your flesh and blood as a hotbed. In consideration of having a variety of flavors, I've invented 11 kinds of mushrooms. Some are rich in milk. This can be directly drunk. Some are like beef. Heh. When frying them, there's no need to provide any extra oil. Some are as delicate as fish meat but without the bones. My suggestion is to roast or boil it. All of these wouldn't have been possible without your help. If I hadn't already advanced and become a druid, I might have taken a few years, or even more than a decade to resolve all the problems I encountered during the experimentation process. If you have any other ideas that are suitable for me, please share them with me. Your friend forever, Frank Lee. With the letter in hand, Klein fell silent for a long time. He looked up and realized that Miss Messenger was still waiting. He sighed silently and walked to the desk. He took out a piece of paper and a pen and slowly wrote, "I'm very happy that you've succeeded. These mushrooms will help me greatly. They will effectively reduce famine in certain areas. I'm currently busy with some matters, so I don't have any new ideas for now. Your friend Gehrman Sparrow. After folding the letter, he looked at Miss Messenger and hesitantly asked, "How's Frank Lee's condition like now?" The head that Rionette Tynker had previously failed to say anything spoke first. Excited, the other three added. Animated, happy, satisfied. Following that, the forehead said, no longer afraid of being buried in soil. Why? Klein subconsciously asked. The four blonde red-eyed heads in Rionette Tynker's hands spat out word by word. He can extract the soils, nutrients, and oxygen. Frank has really evolved quite a bit after becoming a druid. For a moment, Klein wasn't sure if he should be happy for his friend, or if he should grieve for the crew of the future. As he watched Miss Messenger leave, Klein forced himself to sleep through cogitation. Then, he woke up at 2:30 p.m. to prepare for this week's tarot gathering. At 3 o'clock, dark red beams of light rose up from the ancient palace above the gray fog and solidified into their corresponding figures. Audrey immediately stood up, curtsied, and bowed towards the end of the long bronze table. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. As a senior psychiatrist, she had great control over her emotions. Furthermore, she hadn't encountered any problems this week. She was mainly seeking out donations, contacting pharmaceutical factories, and organizing medical volunteers. However, compared to the past, the cheerfulness and happiness she had when making her greeting had decreased significantly. The Fool Klein nodded slightly in response to the greetings from the members of the Tarot Club. Following that, he cast his gaze at the hermit. He still owed this lady 8 questions. Katlia bowed her head and said with an unfaultable attitude, Honorable Mr. Fool, there are still 2 questions this time. After obtaining approval, she continued, the first question is, what is the state of the devils in the abyss? Queen Mystic's first suspicion is that the Emperor's mausoleum is hidden in the abyss. This is identical to the Emperor's train of thought. She is indeed his biological daughter. Unfortunately, there are no citizens that can be controlled there. The Fool Klein muttered to himself inwardly as he answered with an unchanging expression, the current abyss is a place most devils are unable to live in. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.